IB Nation, welcome back to another edition of the Irish Breakdown Podcast. It is Tuesday, March 7th, which means we are 15 days away from Notre Dame kicking off spring practice. It felt like for a while, Ryan, it was taking forever to get there. Now it's like right here, it's right on us. And so for the next couple weeks, we're going to do a ton of breakdowns of the Notre Dame football team heading into the spring. And then most likely we're not going to have a ton of spring access, so there'll be a lot of sort of spring preview-ish type of topics that we'll also kind of talk about during that first week of spring ball, as well as we kind of dive into really what's going on here with Notre Dame. And Ryan announced today, Joe Rudolph, it's officially official. Gino Guidugli was officially official last week, which means the Notre Dame offensive staff is now finally complete. And so we're going to discuss that today. We're going to talk about the Notre Dame offense, and we're going to kind of sort of restart our spring preview, Ryan. Today we were diving into it, then all the coaching stuff, and so like let's put that on hold, but get back to it when everything is finalized. That staff is finalized. We're going to talk about that. We're going to have our first official football 101 today, so we're going to talk about that after the offensive breakdown and then before the mailbag. So we'll break that down a little bit today. It'll be an offensive related topic, and so I'm excited about that. And Ryan, we are going to dive in today into sort of an overview of the Notre Dame offense. And we know what the expectations are. The expectations are to go out and build an elite offense, right? That's it, right? An offense, what I mean by elite? Does it have to be averaging X amount of points, X amount of yards per play? No, for me, an elite offense for what in the context I'm using here is, are you good enough to go out and win a championship with that offense? Do I consider the Georgia offense elite this past season from the standpoint of it is anywhere close to what LSU was in 19 or what Clemson was in 18? No, but it was elite in that it could do whatever it needed to do in whatever game it was needed to go out there and win that game and lead you to a championship. And if you needed to score, it was going to score. If it needed to control the clock, it could control the clock. Did they have 45 points per game? No, I don't even think they averaged 40 this year, Ryan, on defense with Georgia. I don't believe. I have to go back and check that. I think they were like 38, 39 this past season. Well, they were 41.1 thanks to the 65 in the championship game. They were like 38, 39 going in. Last year's championship team was 38.6. Again, don't stack up to the LSUs and all that, but they were outstanding and did what they needed to do to go out and win a championship. And that's the standard for Notre Dame. And so that doesn't change because of a first-time OC or a new O-line coach or whatever else. No, this is the standard, and the talent is there. I'm starting to get fired up about this offense. I'm going to be honest with you, Ryan. And today we're going to talk about 5 strengths that we perceive this offense to have going into the spring. And then also some, I don't want to say question marks as if it's like oh gosh, I think this group is going to be bad, and I don't know if it's going to be, but questions in regard to get to the standard that we've set for this program. These are the questions that have to get answered for them to get there. That's where when we talk about what we expect this team to be, it's focusing on it from that point of view. And so when those are going to be what the questions and concerns, they're not so much assumptions of a negative, Ryan, but just some of them are unknowns. We may expect it to go well, but they're unknowns. And those are things that are going to be part of this unit, this team getting to where it needs to get to, Ryan, or they're going to be hindrances. And that's what we're going to talk about today.
Yeah, I mean, I think that for me, it's just from a talent perspective, there's not a lot of holes in this offensive roster, right? Like you look at it and you're like, you have a really good running back group coming back. You have a proven commodity quarterback. You have offensive linemen coming back. There's some questions to be answered, and I know we'll talk about this a little bit later as far as like the pass catchers are concerned, but like it's not for a lack of talent. It's just for a fact of proven production that's coming back, right? Like that's kind of where we are with this whole conversation. So it's exciting, man. And it's one thing where I think you coined it perfectly, Brian, in the fact that there have been way too many Notre Dame games during my lifetime, and especially over the last few years, where I'm just like going into a big game. I just am hoping that the offense can keep pace and that maybe they have a chance at the end, right? And the good football teams, the Alabamas in 2020, like we mentioned a little bit, the LSU in 19, there was never a question of, can that offense keep pace? Can they make a big play? We needed to make a big play. You need that type of trust in one another, right? And there's no excuses. I know we're going to talk a lot about, first year coordinator, new coaching staff, and there's going to be some transitional period here. There is going to be. But at the end of the day, this offensive coaching staff, which is mostly intact outside of, bringing in Gino Guidugli and obviously elevating Jared Parker, they're going into a really good situation. I would argue that, Coach Parker getting an opportunity with this group, with as much talent as he has coming back, man, like there's not much better opportunity for him as far as like getting the next opportunity that he had after being the offensive coordinator at West Virginia. So he's coming into a pretty good situation. There's a lot of talent. And I think that the spring is going to be a big opportunity for these offensive skill players and offensive linemen to really be able to start to mesh together and to be able to show what their identity is going to be. Because that's still a little bit of a question mark. We know what the core competencies of this offensive staff are going to be, but what is exactly going to look like under Jared Parker? That's what we want to see, and we obviously want to see all that growth this spring because there is a lot of talent to work with.
The only thing that I would say is I'm not sure how much we're going to see this spring in regard to identity. I think that's something that you see more in the fall when you get into games. But I think the foundation to what that identity is going to become has to be laid this spring. And part of the spring is, okay, what are our strengths? And what are the areas we got to get better at? And I think that's the fun part of a spring because every team's different, Ryan. Every team is going to have a little bit of a different feel, a different look, a completely different vibe. There's different strengths, different weaknesses. And that's kind of what makes it fun to really look at what this football team's going to be. And so we're going to kind of kick it off, Ryan, with strengths. And so as you head into the spring, we know what the easy question marks are, right? Okay, how's Jared Parker going to be as an offensive coordinator? I would just like to point out that the last two times Notre Dame had a first-year offensive coordinator, this team went out and had a pretty darn good year. 2020, Notre Dame had a first-time offensive coordinator. He was 27 years old. He'd only been a college football coach for 2 years. Right. And was a GA for a year and had been a player less than a decade ago. That was Tommy Reese. Notre Dame went out that year, went undefeated in the regular season, had a very high efficiency ranking that year. Now, part of that was they didn't play a great schedule, but they did what they needed to do. And for stretches of that team, of that season, that offense was really, really good and really dynamic, especially late in the year. And then, of course, the last time was 2017. When you look at when they brought in Chip Long for Memphis, he was another guy that he had been an offensive coordinator for 1 year. And a lot of people didn't know who he was. They were coming off the 4-8 season. And then Notre Dame goes out that year and goes 10-3 and was in a very impressive 10-3 when you consider the teams that they played that year. Notre Dame, I think Brian Kelly he's a very small number of top 15, top 25 wins in his career at Notre Dame. And a lot of them were during that season. And then you look at obviously the success we've seen from other programs with first-time coordinators. You look at what Clemson did when Chad Morris left. The next 2 years with two young, unproven coaches as a coordinator, they went to the national championship game that next year and lost in a great game against Bama, and then the next year won it, right? So that's the expectation for Jared Parker. Is he going to be as good as those coaches? We're going to find out. But the reality is we know that that's a question. I'm excited to see what he can do. I feel good about it. But the good thing is he's got some strengths to work with. And that's the thing that you look at and say, the expectations need to be a combination of two things. Number one is, where are you? At certain places, expectations should always be at the minimum here. And then what are you working with? And I think when you look at this Notre Dame football team, Ryan, the one thing we can say about it is a very talented group of players. And that talent for Notre Dame has to begin up front, Ryan. You cannot, in my opinion, you cannot be a championship caliber football team at Notre Dame if you do not have a big-time offensive line, and this offensive line returns a lot of talent. Arguably the best tackle tandem in the country, a center who had a really good season last year, and there's some question marks at guard as far as who it's going to be, but there's no shortage of talent, Ryan. And so to me, when you talk about the strengths of that we expect to be strengths of this football team heading into this spring, it starts right there. The big boys at Notre Dame have a chance to be really, really good, and it's going to be partly due to the foundation that Harry Hiestand laid this past year, the talent that he returns, and now it's up to Coach Rudolph to come in and put it all together and say, okay, Now let's go make this thing beautiful. And I think that's where the number one strength is for this football team heading into the spring.
I think it's most appropriate to start there too, because obviously you talk about how Notre Dame has built its, tradition and built its reputation. It's through the offensive line, right? Like you could always depend on Notre Dame for the most part, historically having a very strong offensive line, especially, when Harry Hiestand took over. And then obviously the offensive line use thing starts happening, right? And you start getting all the great names that we keep uttering, year in and year out, as far as the players that Notre Dame has developed. So that's a great place to start. And then it's also a great place to start because there are a couple spots offensively that we're going to talk about that could be strengths, but it's a little bit of they're talented, but we still need to see proven production, right? For Joe Alt, I mean, we know what the production is. The production is All-American, right? Like he was an All-American last season. He's a proven commodity. You're going to start seeing, especially if you're like an NFL draft fan, as soon as the NFL draft happens next month, there's going to start being those way too early 2024 mock drafts, and Joe Alt's going to be in the top 10 of probably every single one of those early ones because he is that talented. Having him, and then not to mention, there's a decent argument that although Joe Alt is your best offensive lineman on this team right now, the most talented guy on the offensive line might be his counterpart at right tackle in Blake Fisher, who had a really nice end of the season last year, a later stretch of the season. I thought he was very dominant down the stretch. And if he's able to now transition that from, flashes early to more consistent play late and able to take a next step forward in 2023, then we're talking about it's going to be hard for any offensive tackle duo in college football to even have an argument against that, because the God-given ability of Blake Fisher, if he takes a step, combined with Joe Alt already being what Joe Alt's being and possibly taking another step forward, which is very possible for him, on top of Zeke Correll being a very solid player on the interior at center. And then, hey, guess what? We got guys like Billy Shrout and Andrew Kristofic and Ty Chan and some really talented dudes that are going to be gutting it out to be the starting guards inside. So proven commodities at both tackle and at center, arguably the best left tackle in all of college football, arguably maybe one of the breakout stars this year at right tackle. There's a lot to like about what Notre Dame has up front, and there's a lot more proven commodities maybe than on other parts of the team that we know of right now.
I'll say this, Ryan. If Blake Fisher and Joe Alt simply repeat in 2023 what they did in 2022, you're talking about one of the 5 to 7 best tackle tandems in the country coming back, in my view. If they make normal sophomore to junior progress, just normal, and I think that's where Joe Alt is, right? I think Joe Alt is in just a normal sophomore to junior. You're going to get weight room strength, and that just makes you, that a little bit better because you're a year older and a year stronger and all that. I think that's probably where he is, because it's hard for me to envision him improving his technique in his production from a technical standpoint. It's now just, okay, can you be more physical just because you're older and stronger? Blake Fisher's the one, to me, that has the chance to make the even bigger jump because he's coming from a further place back from a technical standpoint. And so I think both of these kids are workers, all that stuff. But I think Blake will also make some of the year 3 strength growth jumps that Joe will make. But it's more of the technical improvement. There's just not a lot of technical improvement needed from Joe Alt. I mean, there's little things, sometimes his punch can get a little wide and, you can, the reset a little bit, but he's just so long, he's able to make up for some of those. And those are minor nitpicks with Joe Alt, technically. And so Blake could end up making a big jump. And that's what's needed to me. And that's what I've said before. Blake's the key to this whole thing, in my view. Blake making that jump in year 3, Ryan, is the thing that's going to determine whether this offensive line can truly be like elite, like Joe Moore Award winning elite, or is it just a top 5 to 10 group? Now that's still very good, but they need top 5 to be truly the foundation of an elite offense, in my view. And we've seen it at Notre Dame in past years. The 2020 offensive line, prior to all the injuries, was a top 5 unit, and it fueled that undefeated season. The 2018 offensive line, not quite as much a top 5, more top 10, but then we also saw that unit. We saw what happened to that unit in the Cotton Bowl, where it just couldn't play to the level it needed to. In 2020, I thought the offensive line more than held their own against Alabama. In 2018 against Clemson, they didn't. 2017 offensive line was that way. The 2015 offensive line was elite. The 2012 offensive line was really good. It was probably in that middle ground between 2018 and 2020. But those years where Notre Dame's had its best seasons, the offensive line has been borderline top 5 unit. in my opinion, with the exception of maybe 2012. But there, they were elite on one side of the ball, or one side of the line, at least, and you could look at that. So it's a easy recipe, Ryan. This line has to be elite for Notre Dame to be a championship unit. And Blake Fisher, to me, making that jump, and he's more than capable of it. Look, Blake doesn't have any issues, Ryan, from a work ethic standpoint, from a toughness standpoint, from a football IQ standpoint. He gets all that stuff. It's just he's still young for an offensive lineman. You just don't see a lot of guys at his age, as redshirt freshman, playing a ton the way and being counted on the way he was counted on. And so it's like my point is sometimes, Ryan, I think we maybe expected a little too much of it. And then when you talk about the fact he's next to Joe Alt, who's the same age, you're like, well, why isn't Blake there? Two completely different universes. NFL dad, not NFL dad, at his position, And so to me, I think Blake has a chance to make a big jump, and he was still a pretty solid player last year. But if he makes the jump, I think you and I think he's capable of. That right there makes this offensive line, in my view, arguably one of the top 5, just even with all the questions that it has at other spots.
Well, and I think the thing to remember about Blake Fisher is I know you obviously watched his high school highlight tape, right, Brian? I mean, that guy was playing everywhere. I mean, there were some clips of him playing center, like he was playing all over the offensive line. He's your starting left tackle going into 2021. Like he wasn't a right tackle, obviously, leading up to that season. This past year was kind of the first time outside of the bowl game at the end of the 2021 season where Blake Fisher was strictly a right tackle all the time. So I think that not even just the sophomore to junior year jump, not only just the age jump that he's going to have now being like 21 to, about 20 to 21 years old. He also has now going into his second year of playing the same position for an entire offseason going into a season. So I think that's going to be big maturation for Blake Fisher as well. And man, if he hits near his upside, just if Joe Alt stays the same that Joe Alt was last year and Blake Fisher takes a big jump, unit could be special, man. I mean, I would argue that if that happens and you get just good guard play, you don't need excellent guard play. If you just get good guard play and everybody just gets a little bit better of the returning guys coming back. I mean, Michigan just lost a couple of their key offensive linemen from last year, right? Who were the Joe Moore Award winner. I think Notre Dame has a chance to be the best offensive line in college football if they put it together. Now, that's a big if. They have to mature. They have to take that step forward. But I think my point is that there is a crazy amount of talent to work with for if you're Joe Rudolph coming in, having that year under Harry Houston as well, as far as like really honing in on the technical side of the game, now transitioning to Joe Rudolph. I think that is a very good situation for him to fall into, and I think Notre Dame has a chance to be a special unit if they put it together.
We'll talk more about the guards down the road. We're going to have a position battle breakdown coming up probably Thursday, I think is where I'm looking right now. Tomorrow we'll talk a little bit about just the strengths and questions on the defense, and then Thursday we'll dive into some position battles, and of course guard's going to be a big part of that conversation. So that's why we're not going to spend a ton of time on it now. But the one thing I will say, Ryan, is you feel somewhat comfortable with the play of the guards. Number one, I think that was an area where I always liked the guard play at Wisconsin. It was an area I always felt that's an area where I felt Joe Rudolph did a really nice job, was with sort of the centers and the guards I felt were always pretty good, and when they weren't good, they had athletic concerns. The other part is obviously the talent is there. I mean, and it's not, if this guy doesn't pan out, you're in trouble. It's not like we talk a lot about Billy Schrauth. If Billy Schrauth's not as good as we think he is, it doesn't make or break the offensive line at guard. He can make it, but he's not going to break it. If you got to trot Michael Carmody and Andrew Kristofic out there next to your starting guards, there's a lot of teams that would love to have that problem. You know what I'm saying? Those are two good football players. Or if it's Tai Chan or Rocco, or right, you know what I mean, right? Like, that's the point. The margin for error at guard is pretty wide right now.
Yep.
And that's where I think it gives you a really healthy feeling about where the offensive line is. Before we move on to the next position, just a reminder, we will have a mailbag after our Football 101. So if you have some questions, go ahead and start throwing those in now, and we'll get to those after the mailbag is over. Ryan, next I want to talk about the backfield. Notre Dame is loaded in the backfield, in my opinion. And now the backfield here, I said it specifically that way for a reason. We're not talking about running backs. We're not talking about quarterbacks. We're talking about all of it, the backfield. And that matters because football is still, Ryan, very much. There's the exceptions. LSU was a bit of an exception, right? But football still, you got to be able to win in the middle. And even I would say even that 2019 LSU offensive line they didn't play up the middle a ton, but they could win up the middle when they needed to with Lloyd Cushenberry and some of those guys they had up front in the offensive line. But they just didn't play that way a ton. But still, a lot of football, you've got to be able to play good up the middle in the pass game and the run game. And that means quarterback play. That means running backs, and Notre Dame's loaded there. You had already kind of alluded to earlier, Ryan. You're talking about one of the best running back groups in the country coming back. You're 5-6 deep. And there's literally 5 guys at running back of the 6 that were graded as 4-star recruits by at least one service. The exception, I believe, and I'm going to check that now, Ryan, I believe the exception to that is Logan Diggs. I believe he was the exception. I don't think any – I'm going to check real quick. I know I had him as a 4-star, but I think a lot of others had him as a 3-star. And so I'm just going to check his ranking real quick. Yep, he was a consensus 3-star recruit. We now know that our 4-star grade of him was much more accurate than that. He's the only guy that didn't have a 4-star grade by at least somebody. And so if you're a recruiting rankings person, you have that. If you're someone who cares more about talent, okay, that's an easy one. Very talented running back room. We'll talk about that, Ryan. But also a big reason for my expectations for the jump next year is not running back room. They had a loaded running back room last year, and there were games where it didn't matter because the running backs can only do so much. Notre Dame has not had quarterback play that is championship caliber in a while. And there's been here and there spurts of it. Ian Book showed some spurts of it. Jack Cohn showed some spurts of it. Deshaun Kaiser showed spurts of it. Malik Zaire showed a very small spurts of it because of the injury. He didn't have much more than 3 games to play. Everett Golson showed spurts of it. Jimmy Clausen was probably the last quarterback that I felt had a whole season where he kind of played that way. And then before that, you got to go back to Brady Quinn, probably in 05. They just haven't had the quarterback play needed to compete with those teams. And Notre Dame's not in a position as a program to win with a Stetson Bennett. I'm sorry. They're just not. Right. And Georgia can, but Notre Dame can't.
Brian, can I just say real quick? I hate when people comment stuff like that and say, well, Georgia won with Stetson Bennett, so Notre Dame doesn't need a great quarterback. I'm like, that's not it's not the same situation.
Which would be true if Notre Dame had the Jalen Carters and the and the guys that they have in those positions. They just don't. Right? They just don't.
Yeah.
And to me, that's the big thing for me is they're not able to do some of the things that Georgia does at those positions. And so that's why they need a quarterback that can be that guy. And I think they have a shot to have that this year. It's not a given. Sam Hartman has got to prove a lot. Tyler Buckner has to prove a lot. But between the two of them, you feel like they've got a shot to have that. Now, when I talk about Sam Hartman, Ryan, it's if Sam Hartman plays this year the way that he did in 2021, if he's the exact same guy that he was in 2021, Notre Dame is going to be very, very hard to beat. Very hard to beat with a couple of exceptions, right? And that's something that we've talked about. At times, he can turn the ball over in some tough spots. But the difference is at Notre Dame, he's not going to be asked to do the things there that he was at here that he was asked to do there in regard to put this team on your shoulders and go carry it. Because if you don't play well, we can't win. That's the pressure that was always on Sam Hartman. He doesn't have that pressure at Notre Dame. So to me, I view him as a guy that we've already seen him play at a level that if he just repeats that for periods of time at Notre Dame, this team's going to be great. And then we saw that from Tyler Buckner to a degree. He's got a lot more to prove. He's got to not turn the ball over as well. But the margin for error now at quarterback is so significantly greater than it was a year ago. The experience at quarterback is so significantly greater now than it was a year ago. I expect the quarterback room to be by far the most improved from last year from a production standpoint. Take out the one game against North Carolina, but really the one game against South Carolina where the quarterback play was dynamic. I thought against North Carolina, Drew Pine did a nice job of just getting the ball where it needed to go to against a pretty bad defense, right?
Yes.
But when you look at what Tyler Buckner did against South Carolina, where he just kind of put the offense on his shoulders, he was able to lead them to 45 points and 558 yards despite throwing three picks.
Yeah.
That says about says a lot about how dynamic he is and what this offense is capable of without Michael Mayer when they have really big-time quarterback play. And I think that's something that gets me fired up about this football team going into there. The backfield is absolutely loaded.
And again, man, like I always go back to Georgia for some reason because, they're the back-to-back national champions, right? Like that's who teams are going to try to emulate and, probably not very successfully all the time. But I mean, Brian, the biggest difference between Georgia and everyone else right now is just the depth that they've accumulated, man, at every single position now. It just feels like they're so deep everywhere. Well, running back's a position where I would say Notre Dame is on par with anybody in college football, man. Like they have that deep of a running back room. You are looking at, on most teams, Audric Estime is your bell cow, right? He's your every down back. Give him the rock. On a lot of teams, Logan Diggs is your bell cow, every down back. You have two of those dudes, and not to mention, then you start getting into Chris Tyree, who is one of the fastest players in all of college football and dynamic when he's used in the right way. You have guys on the bench now with Jeremiah Love coming in and Jabron Payne and Jadarian Price coming back from injury, who, by the way, would have had a big role in this offense last year if he didn't get hurt in the preseason. I mean, the depth that they've accumulated at the running back spot in a couple years here, it's insane, man. It really is. There's a couple good football players who are going to be sitting on the bench this year just because they just can't crack that lineup because it's so good. I've had multiple scouts during this past season ask me about, who's this 7 kid, man? Like, who's that kid? Who's number 3? Like, who are those cats? And I'm just like, yeah, man, they're going to be pretty good, but they're not draft eligible now. So you need to wait at least another year, right? But then you got Chris Tyree, like I said, another guy that, has had production when he's gotten opportunities. But at the end of the day, Brian, I mean, I think you coined it perfectly, right? The outlook of the quarterback position from one off season to the next is so dramatic how much this shift has happened, man. Last year we're like, okay, we think Tyler Buckner's going to be really good if he can stay healthy. Cool. After that, you're like, okay, Drew Pine, solid backup, right? You have Steve Angeli, who's a true freshman. We're sitting here and like Sam Hartman, who was the ACC all-time leading touchdown passer. I mean, again, I just keep putting that out there because I don't think people talk about that enough. He threw 110 touchdowns in his career. And you also have Tyler Buckner coming back. You also have Kenny Minchie coming in, who I know, at least both of us are very high on as a quarterback recruit, and we think that he could be a very good player at the next level. And you also have Steve Angeli. I mean, you in the bowl game, you were one bad play away from Steve Angeli being the quarterback.
And now Ron Paulus III being the number 2.
Right. And now you're in a battle this offseason of Steve Angeli potentially being the third quarterback, but having the battle to be that third quarterback. Right. Like, it's not just going to be handed to him at the end of the day. He very well might end up being that guy. But ultimately, man, the depth of both running back over the last couple of years, but then quarterback just this past offseason, it's dramatic how quickly things have turned around, and you have to be excited about it. You have to be, because this is the best I have felt about those positions together in a few years now, as far as like proven commodities, guys that are good football players. Logan Diggs is a good player. Audric Estime is a good player. What Sam Hartman is. Those things, and that matters in this type of transition.
It's an interesting dynamic, Ryan, because it wasn't that long ago, and I wrote this in the strengths article that I did. Wasn't that long ago, we were talking about running back being arguably the worst position group on the team. And that not long ago was 2019, where it was Tony Jones and then a bunch of what? You had Kyron Williams as a true freshman that Brian Kelly wouldn't let Chip Long play because he didn't want to blow his red shirt. You had Sebo Flemister and Jameer Smith, who were nice players, but they were bottom of my recruiting class rankings guys. Nice players, but meant to be number 3s and 4s, not number 2s or maybe number 1s if Tony Jones gets hurt. And now you fast forward to 2023, and you're talking about one of the 5 best backfields in the entire country, in my opinion, when you talk about top to bottom. And look, this is a debate I was having somebody else the other day. No, Notre Dame does not have a Travion Henderson when he's healthy on their roster. They don't have a Bijan Robinson on their roster. I don't think you need that. Georgia didn't have that guy last. I'll say this, Ryan, and you can disagree with me if you want. I would not trade Georgia's backfield last year for Notre Dame's this year. I wouldn't. No. Quarterback and running back, I wouldn't. Now, yes, Stetson Bennett, put Stetson Bennett at Wake Forest and Sam Hartman at Georgia, and you're telling me that you don't think Georgia wins back-to-back state national championships?
Sam Hartman's a better player than Stetson Bennett. Right. I'll put it in the universe.
Right. And this isn't knocking Stetson Bennett. Stetson Bennett did what he needed to do. And this year, especially, Ryan, he had some moments where, like the Ohio State game, the second half, I didn't think he played very well in the first half. Second half, he's going toe-to-toe with C.J. Stroud, and he's making the plays to help that team win that football game, right? He made the throws he needed to put TCU away early. So I'm not one of those people that I like to joke about his age, but I'm not someone he sucks as I'm not that person. He's a good college quarterback.
He turned himself into a very good college quarterback by the end. He did. Yes, absolutely.
Now, he had a lot of time to get there. I mean, 100%. Let's not pretend that that's not a reality of the situation, but he's not Drew Pine. He's not, Jacob Coker even, right? And that's, Alabama can win with a Jacob Coker. They can win a championship with a Greg McElroy. Notre Dame can't. That's a reality. And so they need a big-time quarterback, but then also to have the running back depth with that offensive line. Because if you have an elite offensive line, but then you don't have a really good running backs, or you have a great running backs but not a great offensive line, then you're not going to have a great running game situation. The fact that Notre Dame looks to be so good at both that you look into it, you feel really good about where this team is going to be. You're really going to be – it's got a chance to be loaded. Now, the third strength, Ryan, is – so we're going to do 3 kind of personnel strengths and then 2 sort of quality offense strengths. The third personnel strength is interesting because we're going to talk a little bit about it in the next segment too, where we talk about concerns. And that is perimeter talent, the perimeter positions, wide receivers and tight ends. We're gonna get into some of the question marks in a second, but the one thing that I don't think you can deny going into the season, Ryan, is take the conversation of production and experience away, because we're not talking about that per se. Just looking at the God-given ability, the size, the length, the athleticism of this unit, this is a very deep, very talented group of skill players. And I'm talking about receivers and tight ends. Is there a Michael Mayer in the group? That we'll address here in a minute. But there's no doubt that this group has tons of length, tons of athleticism, tons of talent. They got to put it all together, but you're working with a very, very good baseline of that size, speed, potential conversation here, Ryan, that hasn't been there in past years when Notre Dame was really good. I would not trade the 2018 receiving core for this one. I think Miles Boykin, as far as where we were at this time, now Miles Boykin had a breakout and all that, but it was 3 guys and then not a lot else after that, right?
Yeah, yep.
So 17 for sure I'm not trading, right? 19, maybe I might trade that one because you had some guys, they didn't always use them, but you had some guys. But the point is, this has got a chance to be a really, really good receiving core. They got a lot to prove, which we'll get into here in the next segment. But, man, I like the talent of this group. And it's big. It's a big group. You got a lot of guys that are 6'2 plus, man. 6'1.5", 6'2 plus, where last year you kind of had, like, really no one like that in the rotation early. Eventually, Tobias and Dion got in the conversation. But this is going to be – I mean, you have Dion and Tobias coming back. You add 6'2 Caleb Smith. You add 6'3 Braylon James. You add some of that size into it, and now all of a sudden you're talking about a group that has a chance to be really big. And Notre Dame's not going to be small at tight end next year without Michael Mayer.
No,
I mean, Mitchell Evans is a big boy. Holden States is going to get bigger.
He's bigger than Michael Mayer.
Yeah.
Mitchell Evans is a bigger
Taller
player
for
than Michael
sure,
Mayer.
and higher. Yeah, yes, absolutely. So, man, I'm excited about what this group can be. We'll get into some of the question marks next, but man, this group has a chance to be really good.
I mean, I think I've joked about this before on this show, but this is like there's going to be NFL scouts that are going to be coming in to spring practice to do measurements and all that good stuff, right? They're going to walk around, Brian, and pass some of these wide receivers and be like, "Who the heck's that kid? Who's this? Like, who is that? Why is there so many of them?" That's what they're going to say, man, because you're going to walk by 6'5", 200+ pound Deion Colsey, right? And then you're going to be like, "Wow, that's impressive." Then you're going to walk by 6'4", 200 pound Tobias Merriweather. Wow. And then you're going to walk by, I mean, I just heard a little something on Braylon James the other day, right? Around, he's a little over 6'2", 200 pounds, and he is testing lights out this spring, right? And you're going to walk by a second and be like, "Who's that kid?" And you're going to be like, "He's a freshman, man. Oh, and by the way, Jaden Greathouse, 6'1", 210 pounds, and people are like, oh, he's smaller than we thought. I'm like, he's still 6'1", 210 pounds. Like, he's a big dude, man. By the way,
we had him listed at 6'2". It's not like he went from 6'3.5" to 6'1". I had some people say, I thought he was 6'3". I was like, whoever listed Jaden Greathouse at 6'3"? I never saw anybody list him at 6'3".
Nah, he was always like 6'1.5".
Yeah, we listed him at what, 6'2", 210?
Yes.
And he's checked in. He's a little over 6'1" and what, 210?
208, 210.
Something like that.
Yeah,
it's about where he is.
And the crazy part, too, is, Brian, you have such a massive group, too. It's like your potential starting slot receiver and Jaden Thomas is also 6'2", 215. Like, it's wild, man. Right. And then Mitchell Evans,
he was your big guy at the beginning of last year. Jaden Thomas was your big guy. He's going to be like the fourth biggest guy in the rotation this year. That's crazy.
All of a sudden, your small guy is like Lorenzo Styles, who's 6'1", 195. It's just like, that's pretty big still. Like, that's decent size. But Mitchell Evans is a great one because I do think Mitchell Evans is going to take a big jump this spring, having the full offseason healthy and the winter workout, all that great stuff. That kid is 6'6", 250-plus pounds already, man. Like, he's going to be a big old kid.
100% last year, ever. Because he missed the whole offseason with a foot injury, right? So he looked good in the bowl game. I mean, as we've said, he had 3 catches for like 36, 39 yards, a touchdown. But as I've mentioned before, if you were at that game, you saw Mitchell Evans getting open for maybe 3, 4 other catches where he could have had, including a seam route down the right side. But the other guys were open, or the pressure, or he was the number 3 read that Tyler never got to. The point is, he was getting himself open.
Yeah.
And so he showed me something. Holden Stace showed me something. Those are going to be the 2 guys I'm watching this spring. I do not expect to see Eli Raridan this spring, so we're not going to spend a lot of time about him. But when we get into the fall, if Eli Raridan ever comes back healthy, I'm not even thinking of Eli Raridan in this conversation right now because of the knee. And that's the thing to get you kind of fired up about it.
But he's another kid that even him, he's a little over 6'6", and he's 240-something pounds already. It's like these guys – a lot of guys that were kind of built on different planets, man. Than what I am used to at Notre Dame. I mean, people are going to make jokes about like Matt Salerno. Like, Matt Salerno is your smallest receiver comfortably, and even he's like 5'11" something, like 190 something pounds. Like, even he's not that small. Right. I mean, it's not like we're talking about like a 5'8", 175 pound slot receiver. I mean,
even Chris Fink. I mean, he's a good 2 inches taller than Chris Fink was coming out, and Chris Fink is a good football player for Notre Dame.
He was.
Yeah. So talent is there. We just got to see him put it all together. That's
I forgot to say Caleb Smith too is another 6'2", 220 something.
Well, I had mentioned him when I was talking about all the big guys. You had the transfer version of Caleb Smith. We have to, I don't want to see because I watched this show called The Chosen, right? Yeah. It's about Jesus and him calling the apostles. And they had 2 Jameses, if you remember, the 12 apostles, 2 guys named James. And in the show, they call him Big James and Little James. And I'm like, I'm not calling the other Caleb Smith Little Caleb. I find KK, that just man. Like, so, yeah. I'm not calling him KK either, man. I just don't know him like that yet. He's going to have to make a couple plays before I call him KK. But, there's a lot of talent. And again, we're not talking about him in this show because he's not an early enrollee. So he's not going to be a guy that we're going to discuss this spring. But I love the talent. And the good news is, even though the full freshman class doesn't show up yet, 3 of the 4 do.
Yes.
So you're going to have plenty of numbers this spring. And that's what I like. So when I talk about Caleb Smith for right now, I'm talking about the transfer. That's just old Caleb, young Caleb. That's about the only way I'm going to go with that one. But
you could call him KJ, like Caleb Jr. or something. I don't know.
Yeah. We'll see. We'll see. So that's the personnel aspect of it, right? Yep. Here's number 4, and now we get into some of the non-personnel things per se. I mean, everything's built around personnel. Your non-personnel things are the way they are because your personnel executes. But we're talking about a focus on other things. Number 1 is I expect the Notre Dame red zone to be really good this spring, Ryan, and I'm really looking forward to seeing them put more emphasis on it because they were a pretty darn good red zone team last year. They ranked 19th last year in red zone touchdown rate. Now, their overall red zone success rate wasn't as good because their field goal kicking situation was a bit of a mess. And hopefully, that's one area Marty Biaggi has done really well in his tenure as a special teams coach. And you hope that he can get that corrected. Because unlike most special teams coaches, he actually is a former kicker. And you don't often see that with special teams coaches. So hopefully you can get that part going. And then you look at Jared Parker. Was his primary focus as the offensive coordinator at West Virginia was on the red zone. Well, in 2021, West Virginia had the 19th ranked special team or a red zone offense in the country. So you look at the foundation that they laid with Coach Reese. You look at what Jared Parker's inheriting. You look at his track record of someone who had an emphasis in red zone, and they had success with not anywhere close to the talent that Notre Dame is going to have on offense. It's not even close, folks. And how do you pronounce that quarterback's name?
For
West Virginia?
Jared Dagey.
Dagey. Okay.
Yeah.
Jared Dagey and Sam Hartman, light years difference. And that's no disrespect to Jared Dagey, but it's not even close.
They're about the same size, if that counts.
Maybe. Right. Yeah. So, I look at it, Ryan, and I say there's no reason for us to think that it's not going to get better because, A, it was really good last year when it came to putting balls in the end zone. The offense did everything it could when it got there to be successful. Maybe you close out on a few more touchdowns so your special teams doesn't have to be as effective, and you can improve on it for sure. But when you're 19th in the country and trips into the red zone ending in touchdowns, you're pretty good there. That's a strength of your football team. And so now the key is, okay, now you need to get to the red zone more often. That's the thing for this offense, right? Get there more often. But when they get there, they were pretty good. Yep. Then you have Jared Parker experience. And the other thing that I think is going to help them too this year is, who are you as a defense focusing on in the red zone this year? We knew who it was last year.
Yeah.
And it was, if you could stop Michael Mayer, you had a chance to stop Notre Dame's red zone offense. You don't know who that guy's going to be this year. And I also expect the run game to be even better this year because of the experience and the maturity and some of the other things that we're going to see from those other guys. So I expect more balance. And that size we mentioned earlier, Ryan, that they didn't have early, they weren't using Tobias. They weren't using Deion Colsey. I'll be shocked and disappointed if we don't see more concepts to use the size of the receivers on offense. Now, everybody has this thing of you're 6'5", just throw them fades. Well, you can't always just run fades all the time, right? Because you're going to face some good teams that are good enough to take that away. So it's fades, it's getting those big guys in space with some movement, running more overs, more. I love mesh stuff in the red zone because you tend to get a lot more man in the red zone with a lot of teams than you do zone. It's using your size from the. I like teams that can wisely use their size from the slot. So running like outs and corners where you can kind of throw it up and have a little bit more room, where it's a lot harder to ride a corner route out of bounds than it is a fade. You can ride a fade out of bounds if you're a pretty good guy. Like Keely Ringo in the red zone, you're going to have a hard time beating him on a fade because he's so physical and he can just push you out of bounds. Cam Hart's a guy you're going to have a hard time beating for a fade. So when you face those guys, how do you have success with fade routes? Well, use guys to run them from the slot. Wide fades, corner routes, using those guys from slot positions, and then more backline stuff, I think, is another thing I'd like to see. But remember, I used to love watching Brady Quinn on those backline routes, Ryan, because you're just like, it's coming, and there's nothing you can do about it because Brady had this really good skill of being able to throw the ball at like 10 feet high, just under the goalpost, knowing that Stovall and Samardzija were the only people on the field that could catch that football. And I'd like to see them incorporate some of that this year with Deion Colsey and Tobias Merriweather on those routes as well. So there's just a lot of different concepts where you have size, use it. Yeah. I think a guy that from about the 12-yard line, 15-yard line, Jaden Thomas running wide fades from the slot could be really hard to defend. And so, and I'm looking forward to seeing what this red zone package could be. So even though they were 19th last year, Ryan, I think they have way more weapons, red zone weapons to work with this year, plus better quarterback play. That's why I say I'm excited about what this red zone offense could be. And then hopefully this spring they can really enhance it, which then puts pressure on the defense to actually not be terrible in the red zone, because they were literally the worst red zone defense in the country last year. Literally. And so hopefully if the offense can really focus on that this spring and continue to get better, it'll just by nature make the defense better as well.
Everything about Notre Dame says that they should be really good in the red zone, to your point. Like everything about them. I mean, you mentioned the size of the receivers, right? Like we talked about Deion at 6'5". We talked about Tobias at 6'4". We've talked about Mitchell Evans at 6'6". You talked about Jaden Thomas at 6'2", 215. Caleb Smith at 6'2", 220. The freshman coming in. They have all the size outside. I mean, even Holden Stace is 6'4" as your potential second tight end, right? I mean, you have size all over the place. but also you have a powerful offensive line in theory. I think Notre Dame's offensive line, if anything, I think is going to be a very physical unit in 2023. And you also have, by the way, 227 pounds and 214-pound running backs in the backfield that can be like hammers in the run game. So you should be able to run the football, I believe, in those instances. You should be able to take advantage of your size. And I mean, I don't know, Brian, like there might be even a little bit of a package at times where you're like, hey, Tyler Buckner, you're in the red zone, dog, because what stinks in the red zone as a defense? Having to defend a running quarterback. That stinks, man.
Yeah.
It stinks.
I could certainly see that as like maybe once you get inside the 10, especially. I would love to see that. I would love to see that as a package in some. Now, there's some games I honestly wouldn't do it because I just don't want to expose. Like, I don't care if Tyler's my red zone guy against Tennessee State. I don't care. But against Ohio State, against USC, Clemson, Duke, Pitt, some of those bigger games in the schedule, absolutely. USC, absolutely want to see that.
Because like you mentioned, the mesh stuff near the goal line because teams are in man. The other big killer of man is a quarterback that can run the football because your back's going to get turned to that quarterback and there's nobody to account for him at that point. So, having that ability to run the football at the quarterback position can be an absolute killer in the red zone, man. Like that's really where running quarterbacks have some of their biggest impact is the fact that they can pull it. You can do some quarterback run stuff because it's so hard to play zone coverage in the red zone. Like it's just not easy, man, because things happen so much quicker, so much harder to pass guys off and to communicate as quickly as you need to in that red zone type of situation. So even a wrinkle of a running quarterback at times, I think could be beneficial. So you have size, you have a big offensive line, you have running backs to boot, you have a quarterback potentially that could have some wrinkles as far as his ability to run the football. It's not... And that screams red zone offense to me, man. Like it just does. It screams it to me.
Last one, Ryan. Third down offense. I expect this to be a strength of the team again. Surprisingly, Notre Dame was one of the better third down offenses in the country last year. They finished 13th in the country last year, and they finished 7th in 2020. So Tommy Rees, for the most part, was able to put together some really good third down offenses, and that was with an utter lack of balance this past year. Like incredible lack of balance this year. We had somebody in the chat that said something earlier, just a second ago. I said the fact that Notre Dame went 9-4 is impressive considering the lack of explosive plays and they're bad on defense and in the red zone. And a big part of it, you look at it and say there weren't a lot of weapons that they used either. And they were still able to go 13th in third down rate last year. I'm excited to see what they can be on third down this year, Ryan, because, Sam Hartman too in his career. If you go look at it, Ryan, Sam Hartman's been a really good third down quarterback in his career as well. Wake Forest last year ranked 18th in third down offense. They ranked 6th in 2021, and so his two primary years as a starter, Wake Forest was 6th and 18th. He's a really good third down quarterback, despite the fact not having hardly any kind of run game to speak of the last 2 years. And so those are the things you look at, Ryan. You start thinking, man, like the pieces are there because those are, and we're going to get into some of the other needs on offense, but if you can punch the ball into the end zone in the red zone and be a really good third down offense, it gives you a chance. And you say, well, how could they have been this good last year? That's why, because they were good in the red zone. They were good on third down. It was able to overcome some of the areas where they lacked certain things that we'll get into. But those things I don't expect to be as much of an issue this year, which is why I'm starting to get really fired up because I think the talent's going to be older and better. You had like we said this, in the bowl game against South Carolina, the game where Notre Dame scored 45 points and had 558 yards of offense. They started 8 true sophomores on offense. 8 true sophomores on offense. And so those guys are all back, Ryan. They're all back. And that's where you start getting excited and fired up about what this team can be. And and red zone third down are two very important components of that for me.
Well, I think that's where that, especially with the quarterback position with Sam Hartman coming in, that's where that experience really shows itself, right? And you mentioned the sophomore class. I mean, I was so excited about that sophomore class, coming into this past season. And I thought you saw a lot of good out of that group, the 2 offensive tackles, the 2 running backs, the Jaden Thomas at wide receiver, Mitchell Evans to end the season in the bowl game. You saw a lot of great things out of that sophomore class. But now a year older, man, you're now looking and you're saying, like, if they broke out, just, if, some of them broke out obviously as sophomores, but you could say, I mean, sophomore year to junior year, that's usually when the biggest jumps happen, man. That's usually when guys go from really good players to dudes really, really quickly. Now, adding that in, just a natural maturation on top of having a 60-year senior at quarterback who's just kind of seen it, done it, and has had a lot of game reps, right? 110 career touchdowns. That's where the third down, that's where the red zone really comes in, because things happen so quickly in those types of situations, right? And you have to make quick decisions. I think Sam's kind of seen a lot of different things during the course of his career. So when you kind of combine all those things together, I think Notre Dame has a chance to be really good in those third down and those money downs and those crucial situations, because you have a signal caller that's been there, done that, and you have a lot of talent around him. So clutch catches, it's going to be a big thing. But again, we go back to that size, right? To make some of those clutch catches, we have seen in Sam Hartman's career, when he needed a big play, who's he going to? He's going to A.T. Perry because he's 6'4" on the outside. He's going to Jamal Banks because he's 6'3" on the outside. He's going to Donovan Green, who's 6'2", 210 pounds. Sam Hartman loves to throw to size. And I think in those crucial situations, even when Tobias Merriweather is covered, he's not actually covered. He's not actually covered. Deion Colzie, well, even when he's covered, he's not actually covered. Well, so in those money downs, I think it's
can I add something to your point? That's a great point, Ryan. Yeah. But you didn't mention the guy on the roster who is by far the most proven at making plays in those situations, and it's Caleb Smith. You go watch his Virginia Tech film last year. How many phenomenal catches did he make down the field where he's blanketed? Yeah. Right? Because he doesn't have great separation ability. He's a good route runner at times, but he's not a real fast guy. He doesn't get great separation. He just is. It's the quarterback last year, and I'm sure they should have thrown it to him more. It was just one of those things where, dude, if you just put it where he can go get it, he's going to go get it. He's big, he's strong, he's long, and he has great concentration down the field. So even when he's covered, he's just another weapon that you just say, hey, dude, throw it up there and let him go get it. That's going to be an easy transition for Sam Hartman because he likes doing that, to your point. Now it's about getting the receivers comfortable with that and throwing it a ton. Like if I'm Sam Hartman, I'm throwing a ton of back shoulders and one-on-ones in spring ball. I'm forcing them to compete for the football. That's what I'm hoping that that's the conversation that Gino Caduli and Jared Parker and Chancey Stuckey have with the quarterbacks are throw it to them. If they don't make it, if they don't catch it, if they don't go fight for it, we will talk to them about it. Your job is to throw the ball out there. Then we'll get on them about it because they need the experience doing that. Deion needs more work doing that. He showed potential doing it. I mean, the catch he made against USC for a touchdown was impressive, right? Yep. He's got the tools to do it. He showed he was clutch on third down last year. It's an experience thing. Tobias, it's an experience thing. I'm throwing them a million one-on-ones, back shoulders, contested balls this year on the perimeter, a million of them in the spring. Because if you can start catching those balls on Benjamin Morrison, and I don't know how much we're going to see at Cam Hart this spring. He may play all spring. I don't know. I don't know where he is with his shoulder rehab right now. But if Cam Hart plays and going into the fall when he is whenever he's healthy, whether it's spring, summer, fall, if you're going to be able to catch with any consistency those one-on-ones against those guys, then you can do it on anybody on your schedule, flat out, point blank. Yep. And so I'm every time Tobias Merriweather is in a one-on-one down the field with Benjamin Morrison, I'm going to throw him the ball and make him make a play for it. And say, how bad do you really want this thing, man?
You know what's crazy too, Brian, is that you have all that size outside and you have a quarterback that is very adept with throwing the ball up and giving back shoulder opportunities. You know, one part that Notre Dame cornerbacks have struggled with at times, I think like Troy Pride and even Cam Hart a little bit over the last couple of years, is playing the football in the air, man. Well, some of these quarterbacks better get to work on that, man, because I think there's going to be a lot of opportunities to improve that facet of your game. So that's the best part about spring ball is that stuff is going to improve the other side of the ball too, like the iron sharpens iron thing, right? Like if you're Benjamin Morrison, you need to go to work to cover guys like Deion Colzie and Tobias Merriweather every play because those are guys that, again, when they're covered, sometimes they're still not covered. Like that's kind of the foregone thing that we're going for. So it could help a lot of different areas of this team, not even just, the back shoulder game as far as like third downs and red zones and like those money type of plays.
Well, I think the fact that Sam Hartman is going to have more tight end potential production is big too. I mean, you look at last year, Blake Whiteheart, 6'4" guy, decent size. I don't remember him being super athletic. Ryan, you'd be able to correct me. You've probably seen more of him than I do. He's okay, right?
He's a nimble kid. Like he gets in and out of breaks pretty well, but he's not like straight line fast, really. Yeah.
He had 24 catches for 295 yards. The other tight ends had a total of 9 catches. So you're talking about 33 catches from the tight ends.
Yep.
The year before, you had 28 catches from the tight ends. In the year before. I mean, so in 2 years, the Wake Forest tight ends as a group did not catch as many passes as Michael Mayer caught in 2022. Michael Mayer alone caught in 2022. And that was Michael Mayer's less year when it comes to production as far as catches. So I think that's going to be a big part of this too, is where a lot of his picks happened were over the middle of the field, thrown to some tight areas. And I don't know if being 6'4" as a receiver working inside is not the same as being 6'4", 245, 250 working in the middle of the field. I'm curious how that's going to impact Sam Hartman's game as well. I'm very curious how that's going to impact it. So, Ryan, let's move on to some of the question marks that have to get answered. And some of them are not. And the first one is going to be like that. There's some of these that are not necessarily concerns in regard to it's a negative, it's a bad thing. It's just more of an unknown. For example, how quickly, number one question for me is how quickly can this new staff mesh? Now, the good thing is last year it was 1 returner and 4 new guys is what we had on offense. A new running backs coach, new receivers, new tight ends, new O-line coach. Now, Tommy Rees had a year working with Harry Hiestand in the past, but that had been 5 years prior, and they hadn't really worked together in the capacity in which they worked together last year. But everybody else was new. Chancey Stuckey was brought in primarily because of John McNulty. And so you thought that they'd have a relationship, and then John McNulty leaves, and now Chancey Stuckey doesn't know anybody on the offensive staff. And so when you look at it and you say to yourself, okay, you've got 3 new offensive coaches. And my answer to that is yes, that's one few newer coaches than what you had the year before. And so there's a little bit more, on the perimeter, they've all worked together before. Coach Stuckey, Coach McCullough, and Coach Parker have all worked together before. The other 2 parts, guys that haven't worked together before. That's all part of it. But that's what's great about spring ball. The offensive staff is there. They're going to have 2 weeks. Joe Rudolph's going to be on campus for 2 weeks before spring starts. Going to give him plenty of chances to get to know the players a little bit, but more importantly, to get to know the other coaches. What's the communication like? How do they communicate in meetings? How do they communicate on the practice field? Is Jared Parker able to set the agenda and then everybody follows it? Those are all question marks that have to get answered, Ryan. And if they don't get answered effectively, then this staff is not going to be able to reach the maximum potential with this offensive football team. The staff has to be able to find ways to blend together to really get the most out of it. And I say they have to do that not because I'm concerned about it or they haven't done it in the past. It's just this is always a question mark when you bring in new coaches. And when a guy that's on the staff is now in a new role, how are Coach Stuckey and Coach McCullough going to respond to Jared Parker now that he is the coordinator, not just another assistant? Those are all dynamics that you can think all you want that it's going to be fine, but you need to see it. And so that's something I'm looking for this spring.
Well, and I think I definitely talked about this maybe last week, the week before. I think it was last week we were talking about the whole Joe Rudolph thing and obviously him becoming the offensive line coach potentially. But Brian, for me, I talked about it like this. If you're Jared Parker now becoming the offensive coordinator at Notre Dame, you look to your right, you have Gino Guidugli, who has been a play caller on the college level. You look to the other side, and you're like, I now have Joe Rudolph, who has called offense at the college level. By the way, I have Dylan McCullough, who was a running back coach with the Kansas City Chiefs, means he was around Andy Reid, who is a very sharp offensive mind, right? So there's a lot of experience there, and there's a lot of knowledge there. And I think that could be a big added bonus to Jared Parker, kind of meshing his style with like, hey, well, that's a good idea. Maybe we should use a little bit of a wrinkle in there, and we could utilize that a little bit. But the other side of that conversation, though, is that sometimes too much information is way too much information, right? And I do worry a little bit about Coach Parker. I want this to be your offense. I do. At the end of the day, you're the guy calling the plays. You're the guy that's butt's going to be on the line if it's not going well, and you're the guy that's going to get praised if it is going well. So this needs to be your offense. I want him to be able to collaborate with the other coaches and to obviously get those ideas and utilize what he thinks that he can utilize. But sometimes when there's too many voices, there's too much experience, sometimes that does cloud the vision a little bit. So I think the meshing is absolutely important because you have a lot of big personalities on the staff offensively. We know that Dylan McCullough has a big personality. We know Chancey Stuckey has a big personality in a good way. It's not a negative. They're just big personalities. Joe Rudolph has a ton of experience. But being able to mesh cohesively, because there are a lot of different types of personalities in that offensive coaching staff. There's a lot of different experience levels in that offensive coaching staff. Joe Rudolph has been doing this for a pretty long time now. Dylan McCullough has been doing this for a pretty long time now. Chancey Stuckey, not as much experience as obviously that group. Gino Guidugli has a decent amount of coaching experience. So there's a little bit of a nice mixture there, which sometimes can mesh really well. But to your point, it's not a negative. It's just, what is it going to look like? What is the conversations and the relationships between each one of these coaches going to look like? We have no idea. We partly know, the guys that are in similar situations, the Dylan McCulloughs, the Chancey Stuckeys, like how they interact together is probably going to be pretty similar because they're in the same exact position. But it's not going to be exactly the same for Jared Parker. It's not. You don't know what it's going to look like with Joe Rudolph. You don't know what it's going to look like with Gino Guidugli. That is an unknown until it's not an unknown anymore. I think it could turn out really great, but at the end of the day, you have a new offensive coordinator that needs to have his identity on this program, on this offensive side of the football, and you need everyone to buy in, right? And I need to see if that buy-in starts happening this spring. Like you said earlier, you're not going to know a full identity in the spring, but there needs to be some groundwork that's laid to understand this is happening. Right.
Yeah, you're definitely trying to establish it, Ryan. You don't just say, well, let's see how spring goes, and then we'll figure out who we want to be. No, you establish first day of winter workouts, this is who we want to be, but it'll adjust and adapt as you go through spring and see what your team is or is not good at. And so for me, Ryan, I think you hit on a point. You kind of got to this, and I'm just going to say it bluntly. Adding 3 coaches to your staff with play calling experience can be a really good thing or a really bad thing. And it all determines on how much people accept their roles, right? And that's the reality of it, right? Got to know your role. And it also is dependent upon, so it's partly dependent on those coaches knowing, hey, look, I'm not the OC now. I'm the quarterback's coach. I'm not the OC now. I'm the offensive line coach. That's my job. But it also is dependent on Jared Parker showing enough reverence and respect for those coaches to then seek their counsel in a way that you lean on some of those experiences while building the offense into what you want it to be. And so there's both of that. Because if you have these guys that are always trying to bully their opinions on everybody else, well, I've been a coordinator. I've been in those meetings before, Ryan. It's nauseating, right? Like, yes, and you're not a coordinator anymore for a reason, I wanted to say, in those meetings. Now, I'm not saying that about these guys, but I wanted to say it in those meetings. But at the same time, it can't always be Jared Parker whenever someone has an idea saying, well, look, I'm the OC now. We're going to do it my way. It can't be either one of those. It has to be both working together and them showing respect for the fact that you are the boss of the offense and then you showing respect for, I've got some really talented guys in this room. And that's true of Dylan McCullough, who hasn't been a coordinator, but is a really accomplished football coach. And somebody like Chancey Stuckey, who has a completely different background from everybody else on the staff because Chancey's football experience didn't come from coaching. He's now going to his 3rd year as a coach. It came from being a guy that caught over 100 passes in the National Football League over a 5-year career. So you've got all these really unique backgrounds. It's up to Jared Parker to say, let's mold them all together and figure out how we can make this one cohesive group. But at the end of the day, all 5 guys, when they leave that office with the game plan and the practice plans and everything else, they've got to be on the same page. And that's going to be a big thing.
Well, and that's in every profession of life, right? That stuff happens. I mean, I think of it like, Brian, it's like if I'm a CEO of a company and I just hire a new president to be like the guy underneath me and he has CEO experience, he's going to have something in him that's going to say, like, I know what I'm doing, right? Like, I know that that's the wrong way to do it, but that's not your role in this, right? Your role is to make suggestions if I need it, right? If I ask you and I counsel you to have that type of background. But I just think that defining roles is very important. But at the end of the day, man, this is Coach Parker's show offensively. It's a show, man. And it's up to him to make those decisions, to counsel appropriately, to mesh what needs to be meshed and mesh what does not need to be put into the playbook. That's so important.
Because if this offense doesn't work, nobody's like, that freaking Gino Guidugli, man. No, man, freaking Joe Rudolph is terrible. Right. No, it's going to be, what the heck's up with Jared Parker?
Exactly.
Right?
Fair or unfair sometimes, but yeah.
Right. So he's going to have to make sure that he has conviction in what he's doing. But sometimes your conviction can be in that guy knows more about this thing than I do.
Exactly.
And that's what you do. Like Ryan, when I hired you, part of the reason is to say, we have no draft presence here. Yes, you're going to be covering recruiting, but I also try to give you the space to say, let's use this other thing that you bring to the table that I don't have any interest in. Right.
Yeah.
And that's knowing that your people's strengths. And so you, as an OC, has to do that. Use your people's strengths, know where this guy brings more experience and talent than you do, and allow him to speak into that particular area when that's the part of the conversation. And I think that's an important part. And hopefully Jared Parker learned it. And I think it's going to be a great experience for him. What he went to West Virginia with a head coach that didn't always listen to the things he had to say. If you're a good coach, you learn from that and say, and this is part of Marcus Freeman's problem last year, as I actually think Coach Freeman gave too much deference to his assistant coaches because he wished a head coach would have had more faith in him, perhaps. And that can be an issue for a first-time head coach, first-time coordinator. Now, I think Coach Freeman started taking more and more control of it. But for Jared Parker, it's, hey, you had a guy that wouldn't listen to you enough. Don't be that guy to these other coaches. But you also still have to have enough command that everybody knows you're in charge. And that's the reality of it. And I'm optimistic they're going to get there, but until they prove it, it's an unknown.
Right.
Number 2, question, concern. And I don't know if we'll have the answer fully this spring, but if it doesn't start to get answered this spring, I'm going to get nervous coming out of the spring. And that is who becomes the go-to pass catcher, or hopefully pass catchers for Notre Dame this year. There's no question who it was the last 2 years. None. It was Michael Mayer. And even in 2021, Kevin Austin was the complementary player to Michael Mayer. Michael Mayer was still the dude.
Yes.
Who's going to be that guy this year? And I'm not talking, Ryan, from a volume standpoint. I'm not talking about who's going to be that 80-catch, 1,200-yard guy. That's what I'm talking about. For me, it's more of, okay, who is the guy that the quarterback goes to when he's in trouble? Who is the guy that's going to step up in the big games? Who's going to be the guy that steps up in the big moments? Because, like, part of the thing that made Will Fuller special, yes, he had 70 catches for 10,000 yards or 1,000
yards would be impressive.
1,000 yards one year. Next year, he has 60-some catches, 1,200 yards. I mean, the production was phenomenal. Like, 29 touchdowns over 2 years. That was all phenomenal. But the thing that made Will Fuller special to me was not that. It's that Will Fuller made money plays.
Right.
You look at the game winner against Virginia in 2015. You look at the game winner against Temple in 2015. You look at the touchdown early against USC, where USC had just quickly grabbed all the momentum. You're talking about a team that had just destroyed you the year before at their place, 49-14. And you answer right back, smoke Dory Jackson for a touchdown. Like, Will Fuller could make the money plays as well. And that to me mattered as much, if not more, than the production overall. That's what I'm talking about when I talk about go-to guy. I don't care if you're an 800-yard guy or 700-yard guy or 1,200-yard guy. Who's the guy that when they're in the playoff next year and it's 3rd and 5 and you're down 6 and you're driving on Georgia, who's going to step up and make a play? Because when they got into that situation in 2017, Ryan, nobody stepped up against Georgia. When they got in that situation in 2018 against Clemson, nobody stepped up in that situation. When they got into that situation against Georgia in 2019, nobody stepped up in that situation, right? And so that's what I'm talking about. Who are the money guys? Who are the guys that when the quarterback knows I have a play to make, this is where I'm going to go to football? Because we can say all we want. Well, you shouldn't lock in on a receiver. That's fine, and in theory, for most of the time, that's important. But you're going to design a play on 3rd and 5 to go to somebody.
Sure.
And who are the guys you're going to design it to? Who are going to make those plays? Who are the guys that you as an offense – who are the guys as I'm sitting here, I'm the offensive coordinator at Notre Dame, right? I'm Jared Parker. And I'm sitting there with my staff every Sunday night, and we're sitting there saying, okay, who do we have to figure out ways to get the ball to this week? How are we going to figure out how to get this guy the football this week? Because our game plan has to be built around getting this guy and this guy the football. Who forces you into having that conversation? That's what I want to know. The talent is there, Ryan, at receiver, at tight end, at running back, all over the place. Who at receiver and at tight ends this spring steps up and it becomes that guy, or hopefully those guys. Now, that doesn't mean on 3rd and 5, your money guy may be Jaden Thomas, even though he may not be your money guy in other situations, but who steps up in whatever circumstances says, this down, this situation, this game, get me the ball. Because I'm gonna go do this. Guy can't cover me. I'm gonna smoke him. Like, dude, you're gonna get the best country corner. I don't care. I got this. You want that kind of guy. I don't know who that's gonna be yet. There's a lot of options, but nobody's proven to be that guy yet, Ryan. And that's where we talk about the talent from the earlier portion is there, but who has proven to be that guy so far? Nobody. Yeah. And that's something we're gonna have to start. We're gonna start hearing and seeing through the spring. Oh, every time they get to a team period, this dude all of a sudden gets the ball thrown his way a bunch. Does he make plays or not? We're going to start to see that stuff, and it builds the foundation for what this team's going to become in the fall.
We've already been asked this question a million times this offseason so far as like, who's the guy at wide receiver? Because the fun parts and also the volatile part is that nobody knows the answer to that right now. You know, if I said right now, I think Deion Coles is going to be that guy, you would be like, okay, I could see that. But I could also say Tobias Merriweather is going to be that guy. And you would say, like, yeah, I could also see that one. I could say Jaden Thomas. And then I could also say, you know, maybe Mitchell Evans sprinkling in at times. It could be the guy in the passing game. And all those answers are correct right now. None of them are wrong because we don't know the answer to it, right? Like,
you could say it's both, right? You could say they're all wrong, right? But you could also then say, but they all end up turning being wrong. That's exactly your point, right?
Exactly.
We don't know. We don't know.
And it makes it a fun discussion. But it's also, this is that proven commodity versus talent thing we were talking about earlier, right? You don't know who those guys are. There's a lot of talents, so there's a lot of options in theory. But at the end of the day, when the light shines brightest and if you're away at USC in a bright moment of the game, in a night game, like, who's that guy? Who's that guy that's going to make that big moment play? When you're playing against Ohio State in a 1-score game in the 4th quarter, who's that guy that's going to make a big play? When you're playing against Clemson in one of the biggest games of the year, who's that guy? That's the biggest question mark we have. I think I know a couple of guys who make sense and that I think can be that guy, but ultimately this spring is going to be a big opportunity for those wide receivers to mesh that with the quarterback, with Sam Hartman. Who does Sam Hartman trust? That's more important than all this conversation of who's that guy that steps up when the big moments happen. Where does Sam guys go?
It's like somebody just said in the chat, the guy who will be whoever Sam Hartman trusts the most. Okay, fine. But where does that trust come from? Right. That trust doesn't come from just we're hanging out and this guy's really good in Madden, so he's the guy I'm going to throw the ball to. No, it comes from who has earned that trust in practice. And that's what we're talking about here. Who is that guy that goes out there this spring and says, man, every time we get to because Marcus Freeman likes doing competitive stuff. And this is actually something I hope that this continues this year, because that's where you find out really who is your guy. Not some guy that goes out there and makes plays in 1-on-1s or 7-on-7s, but like when you're in those competitive red zone periods, loser runs, winner walks, right? You know, who's the guy that steps up in that situation? Who's the guy that steps up in a, scrimmage win is on the line. It's me versus Benjamin Morrison. I got to beat him. Who is that? First of all, who wants that matchup? First of all, that's going to tell you something. Who wants that? Who jumps into the front of the line and says, no, coach, give me this one, right? That's going to tell me something, right? And if you're a coach and you're at a camp, right, and you're like, okay, last rep, I want to watch what receivers are running up to the front of the line to say, no, I want this one. Or, hey, a stud receiver. Like I was at a camp one time, Ryan, and there was this kid that was just every time the best cornerback on the defense would step up, the guy that everybody thought was the best, he would then cut in line because he wanted that smoke, right? He won some, lost some, but I want that mindset. I wanted that mentality. And who is that guy for Notre Dame? That's who's going to earn Sam Hartman and Tyler Buckner's trust, not a starter just because, or well, he's this or he's that. It's who earns it through how they go out and prepare every week. Those are going to be the questions.
Because it's not just the wide receiver coach that's going to be evaluating that position every day. The quarterbacks watch those drills, man. They watch those. They see the routes that they're running. If I have a wide receiver out there that's just running half-butt routes all day, right, and on air and just not giving any effort at all and not competing for the football, I'm not looking for that guy. I mean, Sam Hartman's obviously been here in the winter for those winter workouts, but this is a big opportunity for Sam Hartman to see these guys in live action, going against other people. Who are those competitive guys that when it matters most are going to say, I'm the dude. I'm that guy. Like, I'm going to run my route hard. I'm going to win at the catch point when it matters most. We don't know that answer right now. We have a bunch of guys that could be that. And historically speaking, we can pull some stuff from what Sam Hartman has liked at Wake Forest and said, like, Deion Colsey, Tobias Merriweather probably make a lot of sense for being that guy. But at the end of the day, he didn't have a slot receiver that looks like Jaden Thomas there. He hasn't had tight ends that look like a Mitchell Evans there. He hasn't had those types of guys. So could his preference change based upon what he sees at Notre Dame compared to where it was at Wake Forest? I mean, that's why this spring is so big, because this is more than anything for me. This is an opportunity for the quarterbacks and for Sam Hartman to get comfortable with what's around him, to know who his guys are, because when fall comes around, man, that foundation has to be laid a little bit. You need to know they'll be throwing routes they've been throwing routes all winter. They'll be throwing routes all spring. They're going to be throwing routes all the way up into fall practice. By the time fall practice comes around and you're really, solidifying your identity as a team, Sam Hartman already kind of knows who his guys are at that point. Like, guys take jumps and different people go into the fold, but he's been throwing with Deion Colsey, Tobias Merriweather, Jaden Thomas all offseason. He's been throwing with those guys. And I think it's going to be really interesting to see just who he hones in on as the guys that were going to make plays for him when it counts most.
Right. So, Ryan, here's the thing about Sam Hartman, too, and this is a bit of an unknown, but we're not going to focus on it now because it doesn't matter now. It won't matter till the fall. The one thing we don't know about Sam Hartman is how is he going to do when the lights are brighter. Let's be real about something. About the only game that I would argue Sam Hartman's ever really games he's ever really played in where they're going to be of the magnitude of what he faces almost weekly at Notre Dame is the ACC championship game in 2021, where he didn't play that well, and then against Clemson. And first game against Clemson was bad. He's played much better the last 2 years, and he was very good this year.
Yeah,
but he just hasn't had a lot of those moments, and that's going to be the one thing. But honestly, that's not something we're gonna know a lot about this spring. Number 3, Ryan, is, and this kind of ties into the last one, so we don't need to spend a ton of time on it because we've already addressed it. But the talent needs to turn into production at a lot of these positions, and especially when it comes to big plays. Notre Dame last year, this has just made me want to cry. I knew this was going to be bad, but you see it and you see the ranking. Last year, Notre Dame ranked 69th in the nation last year in number of plays of 20 yards or more, and they ranked 110th last year in plays of 50 yards or more. It's not good. And it was, we'll talk about all the reasons why. We can talk about those, but the reality is they need to become a team that's capable of more big plays. At the end of the day, Ryan, it's hard for anyone, Georgia, Bama, Clemson, LSU, anyone, to just consistently have to methodically work down the field and score. It's hard. You have to be able to do both. That's why I say, what is the key to having an elite offense? It's efficiency and explosiveness. You have to have both. And so to me, the efficiency part, I think we've discussed ad nauseum. The big play part, to me, has to come. There's the talent to do so. Thank you. The quarterback play has to get better, and that's a big one. There was plenty of opportunities, Ryan. I've talked about this. Plenty of opportunities for big plays in the pass game last year, and the quarterbacks just didn't make the plays.
Yep.
And so, but it's got to come, and that's going to be a big part of this too. And we need to start seeing some of that this spring. We need to see this spring. I care more about big plays in the pass game because I believe with the talent they have in the offensive line and running game, part of the reason they didn't have more big plays in the run game last year was just there was always like 9-10 guys like right there. It's hard to get through 3 levels before you get to 6 yards past the line of scrimmage. If the pass game becomes more explosive, that's going to lead to the run game becoming more explosive, in my opinion. The pass game becomes more explosive because you're more efficient. You attack the perimeter more. RPOs are a bigger part of what you're doing, but you also have to be able to get the ball down the field and make plays in space. Now, when I say space, I'm not talking about a bunch of RPOs. I think a misconception of space is that space is you catch a little swing and then you make people miss. That's fine, but that doesn't happen a ton, especially in big games. You don't often see that. What I'm talking about is getting a guy free on a mesh where he can catch and run. Getting a guy free on an over where he can catch and run, because if you give this guy a 3-yard jump, he's not getting caught. getting this guy on an under route where he's getting space. When I talk about make guys that can make plays in space, that's what I'm talking about, Ryan. Not so much, it'd be nice to have a guy you can throw a now screen to and he can make 8 people miss and run 50 yards, but you don't see that. You'll see guys do that in games against bad teams. You don't often see that against teams that are good. You saw Devontae Smith do that against Notre Dame a couple years ago in the championship game or the Rose Bowl. You don't often see that.
Right.
Not in big games. It's the other stuff the catch and runs. That's part player. That's also part system. And we saw this a decent amount in 2021 late in the year. We didn't see that much last year. And at the end of the day, schemes got to get better. Playmakers got to make more plays. But this one, more than anything else, Ryan, comes down to the quarterback plays got to be a lot better.
Yep. Well, and I love this because, Brian, you just said a couple stats, obviously, there about the explosives. And that's why the perception out there is that Notre Dame is a slow team. And I feel like I fight this battle every single day because I'm like, nah, man, like Chris Tyree's a 4.3 athlete, like he can run a little bit, some of the wide receivers, they can run. Tobias can run a little bit, and he's 6'4", obviously with those long strides. You got Braylon. I know somebody in the chat just said that Notre Dame has no wide receivers in the 2023 class, which I just find absolutely hysterical because, Braylon James is a 6'2.5", kid that ran 4.4. Like, yeah, I know.
We don't need to respond to stuff like that.
It's just so funny.
Just focus.
It's just so funny to me, man. It's just so funny.
That's a troll. He's blocked. Just focus on what we're talking about.
Yeah, man.
So stay on track.
Yeah. Well, I just think that there's so much speed on this offense. There's so much dynamic ability potentially. But to your point, in order to be a consistently explosive team, you need to be balanced in how you can attack and create explosive plays. Like if you're just an explosive running team that can't create outside the perimeter, you're going to be very limited to the impact that you can create, consistently, because then teams are going to put extra numbers in the box. If you're a team that can only create explosive in the passing game, well, at the end of the day, man, you were going to, roll coverage to where your most explosive receiver is, for instance. Like there's different ways that you can take things away. The goal for Notre Dame, in my opinion, is to be explosive on both areas of the game, not just a running team, not just a passing team. You need wide receivers to step up. You need running backs to step up. You need to be all around because the only way to create explosive plays consistently, in my opinion, is to be that team that can do it in both areas. That is a hard team to stop because then you're like, do I put extra numbers in the box? Do I keep 2 safeties high instead of, rotating one down? That's where the game gets really tricky when you're a defensive coach and you're a defensive coordinator because then you have to make some business decisions. You got to make some tough calls at that point. If you're a team that could just stay light in the box and just play man coverage all around and the team can't create explosive, it's easy to be a defensive coordinator. The second that it's not easy to be a defensive coordinator is when you have to make decisions. You have to make a decision that's going to put you light in one area. Notre Dame has enough speed and enough talent to be that team that can affect the game in both ways, and that's something that I need to see from them. I think last year, Brian, I think if I remember correctly, I believe Audric Estime had the longest run from scrimmage last year, and then Logan Diggs, and I'm pretty sure Chris Tyree was third. Was he not, as far as like longest run of the season? And like that should never happen. That should never happen. That's one of your guys that are.
That's a coaching problem last year as much as it is anything. And I'll say that. I'll continue to say that. I don't care what anybody says. How they used Chris Tyree last year in the run game was just irresponsible. His longest run of the year was 26 yards. Logan Diggs actually had the longest run last year. He had a 51-yard run. Gotcha. Audric Estime's longest run was 46. But that's where you look at it and say, how do you not? Because Chris Tyree has a 90-plus yard touchdown run under his belt in his career. And
he's going to run 4.3 something when he goes to the combine.
Right. So to me, it's you got to use them correctly. And I thought last year, out of necessity, they were very downhill oriented, partly out of necessity, partly other reasons. But again, that's why I say, because number 4 question mark is efficiency. They haven't been an overly efficient offense this past season. And in 2021, they ended up having better numbers because of how they did against bad defenses down the stretch. But it wasn't a great offense for most of the year. So it was a little misleading on some of those numbers. But, this past year, Ryan, when you look at the Fermo Efficiency Index, Notre Dame ranked 39th in the Fermo Efficiency Index. For context, that's their lowest efficiency ranking since 2010, according to FEI. And they ranked even lower with ESPN. It was they were 43rd, which was their lowest mark since 2016 when they went 4-8. The previous years they ranked 27th, 11th, 26th, 19th, and 12th in efficiency. And those weren't necessarily great offenses either, but they were relatively efficient. Last year's was neither explosive nor efficient, which again leads to what We Are Not Marshall had said earlier, which is you kind of sometimes ask yourself, how the heck did this team win 9 games? When you look at some of the stuff that we saw last year from this group. And I think that's part of it. Is efficiency, to me, is going to lead to more explosives, and then more explosive leads to more opportunities, more efficiency. I mean, they go hand in hand. And that's a big part of what this team needs to be, because they were not a great I'll give you this example right here, Ryan, is so last year they ranked 43rd nationally in yards per play. And if you look at the teams that won the championship last year, I just want to make sure I have this statistic right, because I'm not sure the way I wrote it. I'm actually not sure if I said it the way that I did it. Yes, I did say this correctly. So last year in yards per play, Notre Dame ranked 45th in yards per play. The 4 playoff teams ranked first, Ohio State, 4th, Georgia, 14th, TCU, and 17th, Michigan. You've got to be in the top 20, in my opinion, to just from an efficiency standpoint. And then the efficiency leads to explosives. And that's the reality of it, is you have to be there, because again, let's go to the explosive numbers. Okay. Explosive numbers. If you look at Notre Dame, ranked 99th on plays of at least 30 yards, and the pass offense did. The run offense ranked 87th, and we mentioned what their overall ranking was. Last season's the playoff teams, when this comes to plays of 30 yards or more, TCU was 2nd, Ohio State was 4th, Michigan was 18th, Georgia was 20th. Plays of 50 yards or more, TCU 1st, Michigan 5th, Georgia 17th, Ohio State 34th. Right? So Ohio State was a bit of an anomaly with the big plays. But 30 or more, Ohio State was right there. Ohio State was 4th, because they have a ton of plays between 30 and 40 yards in their pass game. And so to me, you've got to have the explosives and the efficient. So I just showed you how the 4 playoff teams all were efficient and explosive. They were top 20 in those areas. And Notre Dame has to get there in both areas if they're going to get there. And it's not a personnel problem at this point in time anymore, Ryan. It's, can you put all the personnel together and build around it and get them to play to their maximum from a coaching standpoint? That's going to be the key.
Right.
Last one for me, can you keep everybody happy? One of the concerns with having as much talent as Notre Dame has is, can you keep all the receivers and all the running backs and all the tight ends and all the quarterbacks happy? That's a question mark. And there's not a lot else needs to be said about it, but I'm very curious to see how they go about doing that in their conversations with players, in how they use guys in practice. In the past, we'd see young guys just standing around a ton.
Yeah.
You can't see that this year. You got to keep guys engaged. I'm very curious to see how that's going to be this spring, Ryan.
Yeah. I mean, because I think of running back is a great example that we've talked about already. I mean, we already said it's 5 to 6 running backs deep, especially when we get into fall camp. And, there's going to be some guys like Jeremiah Love coming in for the first time. It's like, that guy's pretty dang good, man. Are you going to get him involved in some capacity, or at least let him going to compete? Or are you going to just turn to just the pure veterans, because that's kind of where they have and where they've been? Or are you going to let those guys get pushed? Like, there's a lot of different nuances to the whole, are guys comfortable with their roles? Because, kids are smart, man. Like, I think Jeremiah Love, if he comes in and he's just like, that guy's pretty good, I kind of have to like ease my time here a little bit while still competing to try to be the best version of myself every day. That's like a different conversation. I mean, Brian, wasn't last spring when we had 4 scholarship receivers healthy, right, for spring? So, I mean, this year you're going to have 9, for the fall. You're going to have a much better number, obviously, this year with 3 guys coming in of just true freshmen on top of the 4 that are returning, right? So you have 7 healthy guys this year, I believe. I'm actually just thinking now. I'm just thinking
you have the 3 juniors, right? Dion, yes. Those 3. You have Salerno, you have Caleb Smith, and you have 3 early enrollees.
So 8.
So that's 8 this spring. And I don't think I'm missing anybody.
I don't think so.
Oh, I didn't count. Did I? I didn't count Tobias. So you had the three this
you
year,
had
the three
9.
sophomores, Tobias, Salerno, Caleb Smith, and then so you have 9. You have 9 this spring. How did I
Yeah.
not count the guy that's number 1 on my board?
Seriously.
Oh.
Seriously.
So 9 healthy receivers this spring. And okay, if you want to say, okay, well, what about God? You don't want to count Mount Salerno. He was a walk on at first. Okay, whatever. I still count him because the guy's scored touchdowns, and he's a. I have no problem with Matt Salerno being a part of your receiver rotation. I just had a problem with him being 3rd or 4th. Yeah. That's my issue, right? And so, but the point is, he's out there, and he's part of it. So, but if you want to take him out for whatever reason, then there's 8.
Yeah.
Right. And so that's kind of the you look at it and say they're in a lot better situation now than they were. And all the guys from last year's spring are older.
Yes.
Because remember, Tobias wasn't on the roster last spring. It was Jaden, Dion, Lorenzo, and Salerno. And I think that's it because Tobias was not an early enrollee. Joe Wilkins and Avery Davis were both coming back from knee injuries. I think Avery played at some point in time in the spring, if I remember correctly. I think he did get some spring action. And yeah, it was a bit of a mess. It was a bit of a mess.
I know you had a tweet, I think yesterday or the day before, about just the quick change to the wide receiver room under Chancey Stuckey, man. Like, it is taking a quick transformation just from getting that 4-man class in 2023, developing a guy like a Jaden Thomas throughout the season, getting Deion Colesy, get some confidence down the stretch of the season. Like, the fortunes of the wide receiver
Smith is
room.
Important too, Ryan. And we often overlook him, but landing Caleb Smith is important because he is the one guy what he can do. Know what he can do. You have a bound, and this is what we'll talk about when we get into the position battles discussion on Thursday. But one thing I wrote the other day was, that at the very least, you're going to have Caleb Smith as your starting boundary, at the very least. Meaning, if he wins that job, what you have. It's a good, dependable player that can stretch the field and make tough catches. But if he's not your starting boundary, then you're going to be really good, is my point. Because if Deion Colesy beats him out in the boundary, now you're really good.
Yeah.
But having those two guys, they're both going to play there in some capacity. You start saying, man, think about where you were a year ago where we didn't know who the heck you and I had to have conversations about whether or not Lorenzo Styles can play the boundary last year.
Oh, do you remember how many times we got asked if they should move Chris Tyree to the slot last off season? Like, it was so much. Yeah. Yeah.
Right. So, man, it's frustrating, to be honest with you, to watch it, how it got to that point in time.
It was bad.
And, man.
Hats off to Chancey Stuckey, though, for not being scared away by that and to improve it so quickly, man. Like, he's really done a tremendous job from that department.
Yep. So those are the things that you look at, Ryan, and say, these are the question marks. These are the concerns. These are the things they got to improve upon for Notre Dame. And at the end of the day, the more of those questions that get answered, the better this offense is going to be. And if they go 5 for 5 in those question marks, Ryan, without losing any of the strengths, even if you just go 4 and 5, and you lose is, you have a couple guys transfer out because they're not happy, but you become more efficient, become more explosive. The staff meshes together. Somebody steps up as some sort of go-to receiver. You're going to be elite. You really are. And even if there's no one becomes the alpha, but you have just guys that are clutch. Hey, Jaden Thomas may not be Michael Floyd, but on 3rd and 5, that's your guy. Hey, Jaden Thomas is not a guy I'm throwing to a bunch stretching the field, but man, I know I can get Lorenzo there or Tobias there. I mean, if you can have guys that do those things, even in those situations, you're still going to be pretty darn good next year on offense. And so that's why I put on the board yesterday, Ryan. So I'm starting to get really excited about this offense. And look, the process to put this staff together was flawed, very flawed. But at the end of the day, this is the point I made on the board yesterday. This staff, as it's constructed now, of what we know now, of not even what we're projecting, of what we know now, is better than the one they had in 2020. And I would argue better than the one they had in 2018. I think 2018 staff's a little bit, I'll take Joe Rudolph, even on my initial concerns of Joe Rudolph, I'll take him over Jeff Quinn any day of the week.
Sure.
I'll take Chancey Stuckey over Del Alexander any day of the week. Jared Parker, John McNulty, both two very good tight end coaches. That's a wash there, right? What was Tommy Reese in 2020? He's a 27-year-old guy that had been a college football coach for 2-3 years. How is he more proven then than what Jared Parker is now? He isn't, right? If you just look at where he was coming that season. And running backs coach, I like Lance Taylor. He's a good football coach. Dylan McCall is better, in my opinion. Not by a ton, but he's better.
Yeah.
And now quarterbacks coach, again, you had a 27-year-old Tommy Rees or Gino Guidugli, who is a far more proven player, coach, who's closer to 40. So to me, even with the flawed process, this is still a good football coaching staff, in my opinion. Now, how good it'll be, that's a legitimate question.
Yeah. Yep.
But it's a good staff that's better than at least one of Notre Dame's 2 playoff team staffs. Offensively. Defensively, different conversation. But offensively, it is. And you start getting kind of fired up about that. So, Ryan, that's going to do it for that portion of the show. We're going to have Football 1 coming up next, and then we're going to go to our mailbag. But before we get to the Football 101, folks, please hit that like button. Please hit the subscribe button. Please hit the notification bell and share this podcast. So, Mr. Roberts, it is time for a little Football 101. And what we have decided to do, we've had tons of people ask us for Football 101. So we're just going to try to take topic all summer, all spring, all summer, and just try to kind of break things down as simplistically as we can. It's called Football 101 for a reason, is what we're trying to do and what we think is a good idea based on a lot of feedback from y'all is really try to teach some of the introductory basics of football so we can all at least make sure we're all speaking the same language. And what Ryan and I have found is as we start talking about things that we just kind of view as just part of our lingo, there's a lot of people that may not understand what that means. And so part of the goal of this show is to make all of us better and more knowledgeable fans, all of us. And so that's what this Football 101 is meant to be about. Some of these things are going to be things you already know. That's fine. But other things are going to be things that maybe people don't quite know or don't quite understand as fully. And so we're going to start off some really basic stuff early on, Ryan. And the first episode of Football 101 is going to talk about personnel groupings because we're going to try to keep them somewhat related to the topic of the main show. So we're not going to talk about Notre Dame wide receivers and then talk about our favorite blitz schemes on defense and football. We'll try to keep it as much as we can to the topic at hand. And the first one is personnel groupings because we use phrases all the time, Ryan, that there's a lot of people that just don't know what they are. And that's 11 personnel, 10 personnel, 12 personnel, 13 personnel. And so what we're going to do for y'all today is we're going to kind of dive into a little bit of what the personnel groupings, what they mean, how do we get to those names, and also understanding that, look, not everybody uses these names, but they're the easiest descriptors, but then also kind of show some different ways that Notre Dame has used them. There's some personnel groupings we won't show because Notre Dame doesn't use them. But we can talk about it, and if Notre Dame ever does use them, then we'll get into them, Ryan. But basically what this is every time after every play, one of the first things that the coaching staff is going to signal in or yell on the sideline is what's the personnel that they want on the field the next play. And there's all types of options, but at the end of the day, the options have to come down to you need 5 skill players in the field. You have 5. You assume that there's 5 offensive linemen and a quarterback. And so there's 5 skill players. And then how you identify those is basically a number system. Now, some teams will use names. Hey, Tiger, that means this is going. But more often than not, teams have some level of understanding of personnel. Now, you talk 10, 11, 21, 30, 32. You can do all types of things, but the reality is the 2 numbers can't equal more than 5. Then you got a problem unless you're taking the quarterback off the field.
So there's no 34 personnel?
There's no 34 personnel. Sorry, there's not. Now, you could technically do 33 or because you could take a quarterback out and do some kind of wildcat, but we're not going to waste our time with that. We're going to kind of stick to some of the more true stuff. And then different aspects within it of how they're going to use. And the first one that we're going to talk about, Ryan, today is 11 personnel. And so we're going to use this to kind of explain to you all where the numbers come from. So 11 personnel, overall big picture, the numbers represent the first number always represents the number of running backs, and the second number always represents the number of tight ends. You don't ever see a reference to receivers because basically receivers are whatever's left over. No respect for the receiver position, can't be included in the personnel. But basically you subtract whatever's in the first 2 numbers from 5, and that's how many receivers are on the field. Because you're not going to call it 113 personnel. You're going to call it 11 personnel. And 11 personnel in this instance is 1 running back and 1 tight end. So, Ryan, we're going to test your math skills. If there's one running back and one tight end, how many receivers are on the field?
The 3 wide receivers on the field.
Bingo. There you go. There you go. So you can do it a lot of different ways. And so 11 personnel does not mean a formation, Ryan. It simply refers to the personnel. And I would contend that this is probably the most popular personnel grouping in college football today, Ryan. Would you agree with that?
100%. Yep.
So we didn't see Notre Dame use it as much last year, but this is what it is. And now here's some things that can change, Ryan. These things right here, right? Like this, the W, the running back, the Y, the Z, the X. Those are what Notre Dame has called receivers in the past. I don't know if they're going to change that now. When I coached, Ryan, I don't know what yours was, but this was always the boundary guy was always the X, correct?
Yep.
The field guy was always we called it the Z, right? It was always the field guy. And then this was the S slot, right? Now, I've had other teams where this was an H because the running back was the S because we call the running back the super back. So it was an S. But, basically, so these numbers don't necessarily matter, but we did want you all to kind of get an idea of how Notre Dame calls those positions, right, Ryan? Now, here's the other thing. The player does not define who the W is. It's the alignment.
Yeah.
Right. So, Ryan, we saw this last year. You'll see you'll see plays where they're into the boundary and the W is technically the field if you're just looking at the personnel, but he no longer becomes the W. And that's the thing that makes it. It's the position is defined by the alignment, not the actual who the player is lining up in that spot. Right.
Yep.
So you can add in anything at any time if you'd like to, Mr. Roberts.
I mean, I think it's basic, man. Just your math skills.
Okay.
Again, people into the boundary usually refer to that receiver as an X, but Notre Dame just has a different name for it. Usually, I mean, but the characteristics stay true pretty much, basically, right? Like a boundary receiver is usually a little bit of a bigger guy, a little bit more physical dude, a little bit more linear as well. Like that guy's usually the one that's going to see a lot of man-on-man coverage into the boundaries, so you want him to usually be a little bit of the faster, longer type of guy. The Z receiver all the way on the outside, which is the X in Notre Dame system, that guy usually is a little bit of a sleeker type of build. Think of like Devonta Smith, kind of like body type. He's a guy that usually you kind of want off the line of scrimmage as much as you possibly can because there's going to be some short motions, long motions, a bunch of different stuff like that, right? So that's kind of, very basic as far as I honestly, when I coached in high school, we didn't have a letter for the slot receiver. We just called him a slot. It was X, Z, and slot. Like that was just kind of basically what it was. So
y'all couldn't get creative at all. You couldn't give him any kind of number. You couldn't give him any kind of nothing at all. A U. So one team I was on, we called it a U because it made for better motions. Like honestly, Uzi, Uno, like stuff like that.
Gotcha.
It created more opportunities for names when it comes to motions, and so that was kind of why we had it as a U. But there's different things you can do out of this. Obviously, this is what we call a 3-by-1 formation. So you'll hear us say 3-by-1, 2-by-2, different things like that. All that means is basically numbers to each side. So if we go 3-by-1. I don't know if you do it differently, Ryan, but I always go with the field or the strength as the first number. So I could even go a 1-by-3 because it's trips into the boundary. But in this instance, we call this a 3-by-1. Now, on this particular concept, I do not call this trips because you can see where the tight end is. He's actually, to me, in an attached position. Now, technically attached, but I should say attached. He's in a box alignment to me.
And we would call that tray if the tight end's included in the 3-by-1. So
correct.
Yeah.
So this is a 3-by-1. So you have 3 receivers to the strength and then 1 to the boundary. All right. And then here's another example of that from last year. So again, it's still 11 personnel, but it's not the W into the boundary. It's now the tight end and to the field. So you see the tight end down here. To the field, you have the X, the Z, and the W. Now, I don't care which player is there. That's basically the way you're going to call it. So you're not going to put the W, usually is not considered the outside guy. It'd still be the X, still be the Z, and then you're just bringing the W over is essentially how you do it. So I have a running back. So this is still a 3-by-1. Now, this is a trips alignment.
Yes.
And this would be sort of a flex So the way I called formations, Ryan, we had trips, tray, and trio. Trips was a true 3x1 where it was 3 receivers to one side, a traditional receiver to the boundary, and then the tight end would be second or third to the field. He could be first, but it was a true 3x1. Tray was when the tight end was attached and on the line of scrimmage, and then I would have tray off, which meant the tight end was off, which means somebody has to come up, but it was still tray, so he was still in that same alignment, or a wing. And then we would have trio. Trio was 3 receivers to the right, and the tight end would be attached to the boundary. So to me, this would be trio right flex, is how we would call it. So then the tight end flexes out in that alignment based on how this one is. That's how I would call it.
So we would just call it, and it's a little confusing because this terminology could get a little muffled, but we used to call this when it's a 3x1 with 3 wide receivers on one side and the tight end backside. We used to call that tight trips, which I know some people would be like, but isn't tight refer to like your spacing as wide receivers? And like you're technically right, but that would just refer to, we know there's a tight end in the game and he's not included in the trips. That's basically how they would do it.
Yeah. So that's a tight. Whenever I use the word tight, it was always, I wanted that guy lined up.
Alignment.
Tight.
Yeah. Usually alignment. Yeah.
I call that we call that bunch.
So we call
bunch, trio bunch, tray bunch, that kind of thing is how we would call that. So we would just go it that way. But that's the thing though, Ryan, is there's people that will use these things all differently. Yep. And they'll call things differently. But this is a basic idea. So this is another 3x1. This, however, is what we would call a 2x2 alignment out of 11 personnel. So you can see it's still 11 personnel. So you have your boundary receiver right here in the W. You have your Z and your X together up top, and then your running back, and now your tight end. He's technically not attached because he's technically off the ball, although this is a little tight. This is a little too close for comfort for me. On this particular play, they ran the football, so it didn't quite matter as much. But normally, I would probably want Tobias to be off here or Mayer to be about another half step back. Now, if it's a run play, it doesn't matter. If it's a run play, all 9 guys can be on the line of scrimmage. You can't throw the ball that way. So that would be this is a 2x2, Ryan. So you have 2 receivers to the top and then 2 to the boundary. And that's just another example of 11 personnel. And then here's another example of 11 personnel in a 2x2 where simply the tight end is here. Now, I don't know how you did it, Ryan, but to me, this was called doubles. I just called this doubles. And it was 2x2. It was, and the tight end just knew I'm in the slot, splitting the difference between the boundary and the tackle.
So 2 different coaching staff I was on when there was a 2x2 with 2 players not in an inline position. We would either call it deuce. Deuce was one, or the other school was flex. We would call this flex.
Deuce for me was invert.
Yeah.
So if I wanted him inverted, I'd call deuce, and then we'd motion out of that. So doubles and deuce is how I'd call these basic 2x2s. So, but again, still 11 personnel. Nothing has changed with personnel. It just gives you some different ways that you can get to it. Next personnel grouping, this is one the Notre Dame fans know and love, and that is 12 personnel. Again, first number, running back, so there's 1. The second number is tight ends, that's 2. 1 plus 2 equals 3, which means there's how many receivers on the field, Ryan?
There's 2 receivers on the field.
2 receivers in the field. There you go. Just testing your teaching skills, making sure you're sharp on it, right? But again, everybody knows I'm just giving them a hard time. But again, that's how you know the number of receivers, though, right? Is you subtract whatever the number of the backs and tight ends from the running backs. And so 12 personnel, 1 running back, 2 tight ends, 2 receivers. Now, the way Notre Dame would do it is the X and W stay on the field, and the player that goes off is the Z. So the number 2 tight end, and in Notre Dame's offense, that's called it's actually called F, or it'd be that it's called the F when they have a number 2 tight end, but Michael Mayer became the F in 12 personnel where he was the Y in 11 personnel. So the way that they did it. But you have 2 receivers, and then so the Z comes out, and he's replaced by the F. That's the second tight end. Yep. I don't know what you did, Ryan. My second tight end was always called an H. We always had it as an H.
Always an H. We had an attached player, then the H was the wing that would motion around, all that type of stuff. Yep.
If we went trips, or if we went trio out of this, the F would be the trio, the Y would stay attached. It's kind of how we did it. And so that's kind of what it is. But again, same thing. Now, this would be considered a 3x1 personnel, because 3x1 alignment. So you have the X and Z together, and then the F and the W are attached to the line of scrimmage, and then you're in a pistol alignment here. And we'll do backfields at some point in time. So you have a 3-by-1. And Ryan, this obviously was Notre Dame's best personnel grouping. And the key, as you're going to find out, is if you're going to run 12 personnel, Ryan, you have to be able to do it out of a lot of different looks. You can't just line up like this a lot, and that's a key to making it work.
Well, and I like the 3-by-1 alignment out of 12 personnel, because I think the problem that you hit sometimes in 12 personnel is that when you have the X on one side and the W on the other, in that type of situation, it becomes a 2-by-2. And in a heavier personnel grouping, which is what 12 personnel is. When I say heavier, it just means I have more size on the field. Obviously, I took a wide receiver out, put a tight end on the field. That's heavier than it was before, right? So in that type of personnel, when you make it in even alignments defensively, when I'm looking at 2 wide receivers on one side and 2 on the other, that condenses things a lot more, right? Like it's a little bit of a limitation as far as how you can work out of the box in that alignment. And a 3-by-1, you could be a little bit more creative with motions, for instance. You could be a little more creative to working backside, and then front side, obviously you have a lot more space that you've created. So I would just say that, out of the 12 personnel, it is very important, because you don't want to be super balanced from an alignment perspective. Because if I'm a defensive coordinator and if I'm a linebacker, I'm like, I want 2-by-2 alignments all day, man. That makes everything even attached for me. Yeah. Yes, makes it even.
I want my tight ends attached. I want to know where my box is all the time.
100%.
And even run game wise, there's advantages to getting your tight ends out in run game situations, because if you're running perimeter, for example, if I'm running an outside zone play here, Ryan, or I'm running some kind of toss, my F has a much better shot at getting up to this backer if he's out here in a 3-by-1 than he does here in a 3-by-1. And now some weeks it may be, no, but we're running stretch, so I need these 2 guys working up there. But if I'm running more of a hard outside where I'm trying to get the ball to the perimeter, a jet sweep, something like that, a toss, I want to improve this guy's angle to get to there. So it may be beneficial for me to have him out wider. And so those are all things you think of. Here's a couple other examples of Notre Dame and their 12 personnel. Again, for me, this is just doubles is what we call it. But they know, the Y and the F know, in doubles, you guys are off. You guys are splitting the difference between the X and the Z, or the X and the tackle, or the W and the tackle. So this is a 2-by-2 that you'll see out of 12 personnel. This is a 3-by-1. So remember earlier we saw the same form. We talked a lot on the show, Ryan. We'll say, hey, use the same formations, but use them different personnel. Okay. Well, this is the same trips a lot. What we call like I would actually call this duo off or duo wing, or you can call it tray off. Either way, you're in the same thing, but you're in a 3-by-1 where the tight end is in a wing, which is exactly what we showed, Ryan, at the very beginning for 11 personnel, right? So this is the same thing that we saw here. The difference now is your 11 person, your personnel has changed. So what does that mean? Well, number one, look at how Clemson's defending the 2, right? So Clemson has got a few more guys off the ball, but the main thing is when you see from Clemson is they're coming when it's 12 personnel, because they're thinking it's run. They're heavy run personnel. This is a linebacker here in this alignment here to nickel. So Clemson's in a different, they're in a 4-2-5 personnel grouping, where to me, Ryan, this looked like they checked to a big guy personnel, a 3 linebacker personnel, right? So they're going to handle it differently, and you may want to dictate that. I may want them in a bigger personnel, especially if I have good pass catchers at tight end. So what does this let me do? This allows me to get now Michael Mayer in a matchup in space against a linebacker. I like that matchup. It allows me to have some big bodies to the field if I want to run certain concepts. It gives me size, physicality, but I can spread them out and run my RPOs. I can run some option routes. I can run some quick perimeters, because here's the thing. If Clemson wants to heat me up in here, I'm running out. If I know I'm going to have a chance to get to that alignment, I'm running outside. I'm running sweeps. I'm running things where I'm just going to take this running back right here, Ryan, and I'm just bringing them and blitz right outside the sucker. And then now that puts Mitchell Evans here in a really important block on the end. But I got numbers here now. And now you better hope this guy can come downhill and tackle Audric Estime. Otherwise, I got a chance for something, right? So it creates different opportunities for you. 3-by-1 there. Next personnel grouping, 21 personnel.
Yep.
this is one that I hope we see a lot more of this year. Now, you can do this out of 20 personnel as well. We actually saw Notre Dame do that last year a couple times where they went 20 personnel. We may see that more this year, Ryan, but we'll dive into that second. But this is 21 personnel, 2 running backs, 1 tight end, 2 receivers. And I hope they would see it before. Ryan, I don't know if you guys did this, but when we did when I was coaching, 21 personnel still meant a fullback. You know,
Yes.
so it was a fullback, a tailback. Now 21 personnel is kind of turned into 2 tailbacks. We would call that 21 speed when we wanted to get 2 tailbacks on the field. And we actually did that when I was coaching, but we actually had to tag it 21 speed is what we would call it, or 20 speed to get 2 backs. But here you see it. You have you have Audric Estime here. Oops. Let's go back to that. You have Audric Estime here and Chris Tyree here. You have the W and the X because, again, the slot has come out, the Z has come out, and he was replaced by the F. In this instance, the Z comes out and he's replaced by the second tight end or second running back. So you have Z, is out, the F is out, and now the second running back is out. Now, I don't know what Notre Dame calls their second back, so I went RB1, RB2. Most teams will have a different moniker. So, your starting tailback may be S and your number 2 tailback may be T, something like that, right? So you can have, and a lot of times you'll call things certain things because you want to have a tags with them. Yep. So you want to give them a number, a letter that they can kind of have motions attached into it, things like that, or personnel tags, things like that. So this is 21 personnel. And then you'll see Notre Dame do that a lot of different ways, Ryan. Here's 21 personnel and they're empty.
Yep.
Right. So you see see Tyree in the slot up here. This is Estime down. It might have actually been Logan Diggs down here, and then W, X, and then your tight end. And then what Notre Dame would also do is out of this, they'd put Michael Mayer in the slot a lot. So he'd be out here in a true 20 look, but with 21 personnel. And that's the other thing too, Ryan, is I'll say this. You tell me if you agree or disagree. I won't be shocked because you don't have a Michael Mayer tight end. And you do have great depth at receiver. And running back. I won't be shocked if we don't see, and actually, matter of fact, I'll be disappointed if we don't see a decent amount of 20 personnel this year. 2 backs, 3 receivers. Especially when you have big backs like Diggs and Estime, because they can do some certain blocking things that you might need that second back to do. I would love for us to see more of the 20 personnel with Notre Dame this year. What do you think?
I mean, we just talked about how the wide receiver group has kind of got bolstered in one offseason, right? You're now talking about 4 scholarship receivers last year to 9 that you're with this year. I mean, in just one offseason, there's got to be other ways to get kind of more speed on the field in that regard. And I kind of want people just to understand that when we're talking about the personnel groupings, it matters who's on the field, right? As far as what players are specifically on the field. I think most people kind of associate, in my opinion, Brian, is like if it's, let's say it's like 11 personnel, they just think that, that means automatically there's 1 tight end in line and there's 1 running back. And that's not always the case, right? That tight end could be flexed out. That running back could be flexed out. I mean, in all these cases, it matters of who's on the field. Audric Estime, Logan Diggs are on the field. So it might be 21 personnel, but that doesn't necessarily mean that both running backs are in the backfield. That just means that they're on the field together. So I just want people to understand that fact, because I think it can get a little confusing to say, like, I associate 21 personnel must mean that there are 2 running backs in the backfield. Not necessarily. It just means that there's 2 running backs on the field. And I hope that makes sense.
So here's an example of what you're talking about, Ryan. If you ever saw Lorenzo Styles as a senior in high school, then what you saw was Lorenzo Styles lining up in the backfield and running the football as a running back. And he was pretty decent at it. So why would I not at times, to have some fun, go 11 personnel where I have Chris Tyree in the slot and I put Lorenzo Styles a running back and run some speed stuff out of that? Yeah. So first of all, okay, what I'm doing is if I think that you're going to always put your nickel to the slot and I'm going to put Lorenzo Styles into the boundary as my running back, I've got some ISOs and some things I can do out of the backfield where you're going to try to now cover him with a linebacker, or your guys are going to be confused and they're not going to know what the heck is going to happen. So we did this once in a playoff game, Ryan, where we knew out of 21 personnel, they were going to be in their base defense. But we also knew when we put 2 backs in the backfield, or we went a true twins. Twins means 2 receivers to a side and a tight end backside with 2 running backs. They were going to go corner over. And so corner over means, so let's go up here to this example. So corner over means, like, let's just say hypothetically that this W up here is a tight end and he's lined up here, and this is a receiver. So what they would do is out of that, so there's no guy here. I wish I could like cover that guy up, but they'd go corner over means both corners are over here, and they had nobody cover boundary. So what we did out of that look, Ryan, is we went 21, but we put our running back Roland Hilliard in the slot, and we had our receiver in the backfield out of shotgun, and we would just motion him out, and all they could do was take their run-stopping safety and put him out over George Jones, and we just smoked him for a touchdown. We just threw a fade to George for a touchdown. Well, then when they did it the next time, they overreacted to that motion, and we banged them with double posts backside on the next play because we saw how they panicked and how they overreacted, and so we did that same motion and banged the post route backside, got us first and goal at like the 2, and we punched it in and scored. Right. So like those are to your point, but it was still 11 personnel or 21 personnel. It was still the same personnel grouping. It just, we got to it in different ways, and it give you some different looks. So again, personnel doesn't equal formation, doesn't mean who's lined up where per se. You can put the individual Notre Dame personnel anywhere you want, but there's going to be 3 running backs in the field. And the other point too is you can line up in an alignment that looks like 11 personnel, and it doesn't mean it's 11 personnel, because the personnel determines what specific players are on the field. It doesn't tell you where they're going to go. It just means they're on the field. And so that's another part of it. Couple quick things here too, Ryan, that will just show 22 personnel. Notre Dame ran this a lot last year, 2 tight ends and 2 backs. We see this right here with this group right here. We see down here, see Chris Tyree as a running back down to the boundary. See Audric Estime here as a running back. There's a tight end, and then there's just 1 receiver on the field. So 2 backs, 2 tight ends mean there's can only be 1 wide receiver on the field. So we saw this from Notre Dame last year, and a formation that I hope we don't see as much of this year, Ryan, is 13. I actually got that one wrong. I put 1 running back and 3 receivers. I'm not going to show the mistake that I made on that one, but it's basically 3 tight ends that Notre Dame have on the field. So 1 running back, 3 tight ends, 1 wide receiver. So that is a look at Notre Dame's personnel groupings. And that's what personnel groupings mean. So first number, running back, second number, tight ends, receivers, it's whatever's left over. So I hope that kind of helps some folks have a better understanding of that. We're going to try to have some more fun things. This is not something that's meant to be insulting or talking down. This is something we've heard a lot from people that, hey, you guys use a lot of phrases and a lot of terminology, and I don't know what it means. And so why would they? They didn't coach football. Some of them didn't play it. They love football. So this is our way to say, hey, look, let's talk about the stuff in a football 101 and we'll cut it up and kind of put it out as its own. We'll have all the football 101s in their own section on the message board. So you can look at these later, and we'll always try to include graphics as much as we can, just so you can kind of see it. I think that helps. But it's just meant to, hey, look, let's all learn more about the game, right? We should always be learning more about the game. So hopefully that helped. And you guys enjoyed our first installment of Football 101. So, Mr. Roberts, it's message board time. Or it's message board. It's always message board time.
You
Sign
should
up
always
at boards
go to
at Irish
message
Breakdown.
board.
Always. But it's mailbag time, Ryan. And so let's dive into it. So we're first, Anthony Solomon says, glad to see you're doing better, Brian. I'm getting there. I'm getting there, and I appreciate your kind words. I'm getting there. Some good days and some bad days. Today's a decent day. Bob Hill with a super chat. Thank you, Bob. He says, Brian, do you predict a hurry-up type of offense, i.e. no huddle? Bob, I think we'll see that at times as a wrinkle, and you should see it at times as a wrinkle. And we saw it at times last year as a wrinkle. I wouldn't be shocked if we see it a little bit more this year. I'm personally not necessarily a big tempo guy, Ryan. I'm not. I'm not we got to go 100 miles an hour. I like quick, prompt communication, but I like kind of being able to get my set. I like motions. I like shifts. I like doing all that kind of stuff. I think tempo is a great thing you have to have. It's a great resource to use. Sometimes you need it. Your offense just can't get into a rhythm, and your guys are thinking too much. Hey, let's just go fast, and everybody line up and just go play. I think there's a need for that at times. I'm personally just not someone who would do it all the time if it was up to me. It's just not my style. I understand the benefits of it, but it's just not for me. It's a preference thing, right? There's teams that use it and it works great. There's teams that use it and they suck. It's just, all the other stuff has to be good. I like tempo as a wrinkle for me, and I think we'll see it as a change of pace wrinkle for Notre Dame moving forward. So I don't expect it to be a thing we see as a main course for this offense.
Well, you just said a word that I think I'm more of a believer in, and that's pace, right? Like I like pacing of an offense. The pacing could be it could be completely different things. So, right? Like if I'm being a little bit more methodical in how I'm getting out into a drive, if I'm being a little bit more pressing of like, hey, let's get up to the line of scrimmage, let's get into our stuff. Let's do some of that pre-snap stuff that we need to do and make sure in a crucial situation, right, at times. So I'm more of a pace guy than a tempo guy because to your point, Brian, it's like the Wake Forest teams, over the last few years are like, they're super like, let's go. Let's run 100 plays. Let's do that style of thing. I'm more like there's different moments in football games that deserve more of a speedier approach, deserves more of a methodical approach. And I think that change up, especially for a defense, stinks, man. Like that stinks. Like, I go from a defensive perspective. I am comfortable going against a high tempo offense if I know that it's going to be a consistently high tempo offense. Like I need to go. The minute that you change things up on me, that's where I'm like, oh man, now I don't know what's coming. Like I don't know what's coming at this point. You were moving fast. Now you're moving slow. You're making me nervous because now I'm thinking too much after you were just
motion
going
to
fast.
shift 13 times in 4 plays, Yes, exactly.
As a defensive player, I want to be comfortable. And that type of stuff, that changing of pace, motions, that stuff makes people uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm. Good question, Bob. Very good question. I think we had another super sticker down here from Driscoll's Intel Poker Face. I dig that, by the way. I appreciate you very much. Mark 1 had a super chat. Thank you, Mark. What's your thoughts on when we play teams we should beat early on, then put in other players to get a good look at them during a live game? I'm always a fan of that. I'm almost always a fan of that. I do think there comes a time where if you have a lot of new guys on a team, that there may be some merit to maybe sticking them a little extra series or 2 longer, because I just need a little more work with those guys. But with as many guys coming back as Notre Dame's going to have, even though Sam Hartman's he's new to it, but most of the part, it's everybody's back. I don't need to see them for an extra couple series if you're blowing Navy out or Tennessee State or other. I personally really want to see Jeremiah Love and Jadarian Price carry the football. So if I'm whooping Navy, I'm getting him I'm actually going to consider getting this one, Jadarian Price in the game if he's healthy. That last series where I would normally have my starters, I'm going to take my backup quarterback out and I'm going to take my backup tailback out, maybe one starting receiver and my number 2 tight end. I'm putting them on the field with my first team O-line and see how that looks for a series or 2. Give those guys some looks there. I'd do that with Jadarian Price. I'd get Jeremiah Love on the field in the 4th quarter in that situation. I'd consider going 20 personnel in the 4th quarter and saying, okay, I want to get Jeremiah and Jadarian both some snaps, and I want to get Jaden Greathouse some snaps, and I want to get Braylon James some snaps because we're whooping Navy or whooping Tennessee State or whatever. Just see what they can do. Get them some run. Like Notre Dame had to be so up. I remember they were playing Duke in 2019, and I think it was like 31-3, I think, Ryan, and they got the ball back like 5 minutes in the 4th quarter, and they put the starters back in. It's like, what are you doing? Like, what are we doing here, right? Like, it would just you're missing opportunities to do that. This year, they just didn't blow teams out enough.
Yeah.
But, for me personally, Ryan, early on, I would love to see some of those younger guys and some of those number 2s in freshmen get a chance to get like 3rd quarter. If Josh Burnham's only played like 5-7 snaps in the first half and we're up, if I'm a coach and we're up 27-3, I'm flat out getting Josh Burnham some extra reps. I'm flat out getting Tyson Ford some reps. I'm getting Devin Houston hopefully some reps. I'm getting those guys on the field and seeing what they can do. No question about it. Thoughts on that, Ryan?
Well, and I think that for me, one of the frustrating things is that even when this is more in the end of the Brian Kelly era, but I mean, when freshmen did get an opportunity to play or some of the young guys got opportunity to play, it was just in those situations like you knew it was just going to be a run play every single play. You knew that you were just going to kind of run the ball down, or defensively, you're not really doing anything because it's like mush rush stuff. Like, I want to put players in situations where it's actually about growth, I think is my biggest thing, right? Like, I want to, in spring practice, in fall practice. At times, I want to throw them in there in the fire and want to see how they react in like real live bullets, not just like when the game is running down. And I think that happens in actual football games at times. It's like these guys get in at the very end, and it's not very practical for growth, right? Like me putting in Jeremiah Love in at the end of a football game when you're up a ton, and me just running the football, in the A gap, 3 straight runs just to get out of a football game when you knew the defense is ready for the run. Like, is that making Jeremiah better? Is that? I don't think it is, because then he doesn't have to work on his vision. He doesn't have to work on his pace. What's even worse, Ryan,
is when they put receivers in there in those situations.
Just blocking
they're getting
out
nothing
there.
out of that. Like, okay, they've been in front of a crowd, but they're not developing. To your point, I think you nailed it. There's no growth happening. I would argue a running back gets a little bit more growth out of it because he's at least got to learn to run against a loaded box and make people miss. He's at least getting the ball. Yeah. But to your point, he's not really doing things that he would necessarily do in a game, where he's running pass blocking and all that kind of stuff either.
Or like when you throw a quarterback in at the end just to hand the ball off 3 times. Right. It's like, cool. He can take a snap under center, I guess. Right. Like, that's cool, I guess. Right. But yeah.
Like, there's got to be a happy medium. Like, you don't throw him in there and run throw a bunch of bombs, right? Sure. Or run reverses. And, there's running up the score, and then we're just running our offense. Right. And like, if I wouldn't go tempo, I'm not putting Steve Angeli in the game in the fourth quarter and say, okay, let's go tempo and put some points on the board. No, but yeah, your goal, we got the ball. Your goal, Steve, is to lead the team down there and to score a touchdown, right? That's your goal.
Well, that's why I like the implementation of the RPO game so much. Because if I'm a quarterback at the end of a football game, yes, this is designed to run the football, but like, I still have to go through my read a little bit and be like, oh no, I can't run against that loaded box. Right. Just get the ball out there real quick. You know what I mean? Like, that type of stuff, I think is beneficial for growth. I just hate just putting a player in just to hit a quota, basically, and there's no growth at the end of the day for it.
Well, and that was kind of my issue with it, Ryan, was you're saying, well, we got this guy in the game, but you really didn't give him a chance to develop as a player.
Exactly.
And there's defenses don't keep. It'd be one thing if the defense was just still running their normal defense and we're running trick plays. Well, yeah, that's running up, but like you're putting 8 in the box, you're blitzing nonstop to try to get the ball back for some reason. And we're just supposed to have our young kids who busted their humps all week in practice just take that beating? No. You put 8 in the – I'm not teaching – because here's the thing. You're teaching bad habits.
Yes.
You're telling your quarterback, hey, if they put 9 in the box and blitz everybody, you're still going to hand it off. Well, what if the next week he has to get into a situation where he can't do that because he's got to go in the second quarter because your starter got hurt? I don't think that makes you better. I think the growth point you focus on, Ryan, is the big key. That's a very big key. I have a super chat from Charlie Weiss's last belt loop. He says, hi, IB. I just want to give a quick apology. Any great army takes time to build. Marcus Freeman is doing that currently. It won't be overnight process, but patience is needed, and I need to remember that. I think I appreciate that, Charlie, but I think another thing that gets lost here is some of us, I won't say some of us because I don't think that I do this, but we have to be able to separate a couple things. Number one is being able to say, this is the guy that I wanted. I'm not a big fan of this coach. And I'm going to voice my displeasure. That's fine. I do that. And sometimes we have to be willing to have our opinions changed by other people whose knowledge we respect. Right. I did that with Joe Rudolph. It's not happening with Marty Biaggi. I need to see it before I change my opinion. And I hope if he's a special teams coach, and we expect him to be that he does change my mind. I always like being wrong if my opinion is something that's not good for Notre Dame. I hope he proves me dead wrong. The point, however, is you can't let things like that then just, this is what's going on with you, my man. And I love your passion because people like you are why we're able to do this, because of that passion. But you tend to allow that thing to cloud everything. So everything that's happened in the last couple of weeks, there are some people that just bring the whole Andy Ludwig thing into everything. Okay, well, if you didn't screw up the Andy Ludwig thing, you wouldn't have to hire Joe Rudolph. Okay, I get that, but that doesn't define Joe Rudolph. That defines Jack Swarbrick.
Yeah.
And now everything. So, like, I have people who I know and respect, and I understand where they're coming from. Like, well, Freeman's not making this hire. Jack Swarbrick and Ron Paulus are. I think Jack Swarbrick and Ron Paulus, from what I know, pretty much would be very happy if Marty Biaggi is the special teams coach. And I wouldn't be shocked if they last year brought him up to Marcus Freeman. But just because they're making a recommendation doesn't mean that Marcus Freeman is hiring that guy because of them. Marcus Freeman's not hiring a coach because it's his buddy. There has been buddies of his that he has not hired to hire other people because those people were better for the job. There are buddies of his that he has brought in that have done a great job. And so we have to try to take each instance and evaluate it for what it is and not put our own spin on things that don't exist. So the reality is if Marty Biaggi is a special teams coach, it's because he's the guy that for whatever reason Marcus Freeman felt was the best guy for him to hire. Simple as that. And so, yes, Jack Swarbrick botched the OC thing. Botched it. Him and Ron Paulus botched it. But that doesn't mean that now they're this evil empire that's slowly like manipulating every single situation to screw over Marcus Freeman. That like now we've gone too much in the other extreme. Like there's two extremes here. One is to believe everything that Notre Dame tells you, right? If you want to belong to that cult, more power to you, right? Whatever. I've never been a person that just believes everything that somebody I like tells me. No politician, no actor, no coach, no anybody, no parent, no anybody is somebody I just blindly listen to. I'm always going to give you my opinion on it, right? But some people just, Jack Swarbrick, Driscoll, you're wrong about what happened to the OC thing. Based on what? Well, Jack Swarbrick said this. Okay, and he has no motivation to lie about this at all? None? Okay, sure. Right, whatever, buddy. But then there's the opposite spectrum of he's this evil wizard that's trying to, in every situation, screw Notre Dame over somehow. And like that's equally as wrong. And trying to incorporate everything that happens that you don't like is somehow because Jack Swarbrick's waving his evil wand. I'm not a big Jack Swarbrick fan, but it's beyond irrational in my view to turn everything that happens bad into what's his fault. If Marty Biaggi works out, are you going to give credit to Jack Swarbrick? No, you're going to give credit to Marcus Freeman. And if he doesn't work out, I'm not blaming Jack Swarbrick because this is Marcus Freeman's hire. Now, the OC thing, we can have a different conversation about because we have evidence that he did something that cost Marcus Freeman from bringing in the guy that he wanted. Okay, but that shouldn't be how the lens do we look at everything now. And I think that's the thing is because what happens is now everything you're turning into a negative. Everything turns into a negative. And it just becomes overwhelming. And it's just like, not everything has to be this. If you have evidence that this is something that Marcus Freeman's forcing on or is having forced upon him, then display your evidence. Otherwise, let's just assume that this is what Coach Freeman's doing. Last part of this, Ryan, and this is true for me and Ryan and everybody. Just because we don't like a hire doesn't mean it's the wrong hire. It's my opinion that Marty Biaggi is not the best guy for the job. For me, there's like 3 or 4 guys I would have pushed for. Number one is LeVar Woods from Iowa. Like him and Justin Ludwig from Vanderbilt, for me, would have been easily the two. I mean, you go look at Iowa's numbers every year, they're top 10 in efficiency every year. Now, he might have not been able to come. He's an Iowa grad, right? But like that would have been a much better hire. Justin Ludwig would have been a much better hire. There's a few other guys that just every year just putting out great special teams that would have been better than Marty Biaggi. That's my opinion. But does that mean a year from now I'm going to be right and Marcus Freeman's going to be wrong? I hope not. I hope he's right and I'm wrong. But my thing is, I think that's part of it too, is I voiced my opinion about Marty Biaggi. Now I'm going to lay out my case for what's good about him, what I don't like about him. But now he's a special teams coach. Go get her done, buddy. Let's get it done. Be the guy that Marcus Freeman thinks you are. And I think far too many people seem to have this thing where they'd rather be right than it to be good for Notre Dame. Like if they think something's wrong, they would rather that guy prove them right and that be bad for Notre Dame than for them to say, you know what, this guy was better than I thought he was. And I don't think we should do that. So I feel like we're just doing too much of this, turning everything into some deep conspiracy, and it just takes away from rational discourse. And I think that's kind of the issue, Charlie, is I just want to see us be able to say, hey, look, I don't like this hire. Here's why. State your case. And then, let's have a conversation, a discussion about it, but stick to what we know. Instead of jumping onto a board saying, well, this is just Marcus Freeman hiring a buddy and this is going to be a disaster. Well, what evidence do you have that this is what he's doing? I don't have evidence that that's what he's doing. I think there's something that Marcus Freeman genuinely likes about Marty Biaggi as a coach. I genuinely believe that. I don't agree with it, but I think he's hiring him for what he believes are the right reasons. And now I hope that he's right. So I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt, which we should all do if we're Notre Dame fans, and give him a little bit of trust. But trust doesn't mean I just have to blindly follow. And that's the other thing that drives me nuts, Ryan. It's like, well, you say you trust Marcus Freeman, right? So you should like this hire. I'm like, no, that's the stupidest thing I've ever heard of. Right? Yes, I have a ton of respect for Marcus Freeman, but I'm also not a member of a cult where I just have to believe everything he says. You know what I mean? I'm going to give you my honest opinion, let you know why I don't agree, and then we'll move on. And I hope he's right. We should all be rooting for that. And I think that's kind of where I come from with this conversation, Charlie, is we just need to be able to have more rational conversation without jumping off the deep end. Something happens that we don't think is the best hire, and be able to have a little bit more of a mature discourse about these, including if you don't agree. If you think something's great and I don't think it's good, don't come at me with the whole, oh, you're this. Give me a reason why I'm wrong. And I've been begging people to do this, Biaggi. Give me a reason why I'm wrong. Well, so-and-so thinks he's good. I don't care what someone thinks. Give me evidence. So, here's one, Ryan. I wasn't high on the Joe Rudolph hire, right? People I know and respect were able to kind of have conversation. We said, well, look at this. You don't just average the numbers of rushing yards they're averaging a year by accident, sure. Right? You don't do this by accident. You look at this. Consider this. He was a coordinator, and that was more of the problem Wisconsin than it was the technical play of the line. Those are all rational arguments that are evidence-based, in my opinion, or at least rational. But when you just sit there and say, well, so-and-so respects him. Okay, but why? And then I present my evidence why I don't like this hire. And if all you have is, well, you're negative, you need to trust Marcus Freeman. Well, that's a cult-like answer. That's not a real football conversation. And I want to talk football. And as I show with Joe Rudolph, Ryan, if you can make a good case for me, and then I dive into the film and I see where you're coming from, I'm gonna be open to that. And I've come around on the Joe Rudolph hire. I am. I get it now. I'm with you now. There's probably guys I liked a little bit better, but I see it. I'm okay. Let's roll. I've been asking people to do that with the special teams hire. Nobody's done that yet. It's just, well, you need to just trust Marcus Freeman. And if you're someone who wanted that, this is not the show for you. I don't just blindly follow things. There's other shows you can do that for, where they're just everything Notre Dame does is wonderful. This ain't it. And I would hope everybody would want some rational thought. You doesn't mean you have to agree with me, but you at least know that I have a reason why that I feel that way. And that's all I ask for. Give me a reason why I shouldn't feel this way. And I hope somebody does. I wish Marty Biaggi would call me and explain to me why I'm wrong. It'd be great. But nobody's given me that reason yet. And that's why I haven't changed my mind here. Whereas with Joe Rudolph, I've done, I wouldn't say a full 180, but it's about a 150. How about that, Ryan? About a 150 on Joe Rudolph.
Well, I would say this. I mean, we talked about this a little briefly yesterday, Brian, but historically speaking, blind followings is always a good idea, right? I mean, I think if history has taught us anything, that's probably not a good thing to do, but that's a different conversation for another day. I would say this, though. Example was last year when they hired Chancey Stuckey, right? I mean, was he the first guy on our list? Was he the second guy on our list? He wasn't even on our radar, right? And at the time, we're like, that's a questionable hire. Well, I'm sitting here a year after that, and I'm like, you know what? That was a pretty dang good hire, man. Like, yeah, good job, Marcus. And that's that. I think the end all be all to this conversation is this. Just because you have your guy that you think is the best guy for the position, it doesn't mean that that's the only guy. That's kind of where the end all be all is, right? Do I think that Andy Ludwig was potentially the best guy for the job? I did, and I voiced that several times. Does that mean that Andy Ludwig was the only guy who could be a good offensive coordinator at Notre Dame? No, that's not what that means at all. It's not what that means at all. So we'll sit back, we'll watch, and we'll see if it was the right hire. I hope it was. I hope everything works out. And it's the same thing about, I mean, like Joe Rudolph wasn't first on my list either, but like, again, it's one of those things where does that mean Joe Rudolph can't coach? No, that's not what that means. It just means that he wasn't the top choice in your opinion.
Right.
But so
and it doesn't mean that our takes are correct.
Yeah.
That's the other part. He may end up being a guy that is the perfect fit for this job.
Hope he is.
And that's
man.
all I'm asking is like, I just don't want the next 8 months to be a nonstop wine fest about things didn't go the way that we wanted them to go.
Yeah.
You voice your opinion, you make your case, you have your debate, debate's over. The guy's hired. Now we move on and hope that the people that argue for this being a great hire are correct.
Well, and Brian, I mean, can I say this? I think I mean, I would say this pretty soundly is that we both want what's best for Notre Dame. Like,
Sure.
want Notre Dame to be successful. Do you think I want to badmouth a hire and then to be right at the end? Absolutely not. I want Notre Dame to win a championship.
Right.
I voiced that millions of times on this show already, man. Like, I want Notre Dame to win a national championship. I want them to be the best version of themselves. So if that means that they make a hire that I'm not a big fan of, I sure hope that I'm wrong, because at the end of the day, I want Notre Dame to be successful. That's
what else isn't good for Notre Dame? No accountability. That was one of the biggest problems of Brian Kelly here. There was too many people that just towed the company line because they were afraid they'd lose access or not get information or whatever else, and they would just toe the company line. And how does that help Notre Dame? So, you need to support. Like somebody said one time, you shouldn't say that this is a must get because if they don't get the guy, it makes Notre Dame look bad. I'm like, so I'm not supposed to speak true what I believe to be true, or something that I believe strongly in because you're afraid of. My job is not to be Notre Dame's cheerleader. That's not my job. My job is to give honest analysis to you all. You all are our audience. You are the people that we are speaking to. I don't care what Marcus Freeman thinks about what I say, and I can promise you, I guarantee you, he doesn't care what I think about things. Jack Swarbrick doesn't care what I think about things. I don't care what he thinks about things. I'm going to give you my honest opinion, and then you guys can decide if it's something you want to listen to based on the evidence or the argumentation or whatever, and then we'll eventually be proven right or wrong on every topic to some degree. So that's kind of where I'm at with it, Ryan, is we just need to be willing to have more good conversation and argument and good faith discussion without it turning into the ridiculous stupidity that we see on Twitter, which is why I say, I always tell you, man, just learn from, my mistakes. Don't engage with people on Twitter because it's just not worth your time.
You're a big Twitter fan, man. You love Twitter.
Yeah. Sarcasm is a powerful thing. Very, very powerful thing.
Very powerful.
Christopher Morgan with a super chat says, just taking a late lunch at work and watching on my cell. I think the offense will blow up this year. Can't wait to see the running backs with JDP getting healthy. Obviously, that's Jadarian Price. Yep. I'm going to tell you what, it is going to be really interesting to see what this offense looks like if Price is somewhat healthy this year. The good thing, though, is they don't need him to be a high-volume guy this year. Like I said, if he's healthy, I'd have him as my kick returner and getting some burn in some backup moments at running back. I'm not rushing him back too soon with that Achilles. But, man, the future of this running back room looks really good, Christopher. You are absolutely right.
If Price is near healthy, man, that is a silly, silly situation to be in. It's a silly situation, man.
Yep. I mean, for me, it's like, well, not for me, but like according to some people I talked to at Notre Dame, people like part of the team.
In the know, yeah.
And this is multiple people, like he was our best running back in the spring, and it really wasn't close.
Yeah.
Now, keeping in mind that Logan Diggs was coming back from a hamstring. Audric Estime hadn't really played a lot the year before and all. But, like, he was their best guy is what people would tell me. This is coming from players. This is coming from coaches. And it says a lot. And then, of course, the Achilles happens but he is I'll tell you this right now. If you're getting into, like, a look standpoint, like Notre Dame's got some dudes that, like, it's like, wow, Audric Estime is a tank. Jadarian Price is a tank. Like those guys are impressive looking athletes, and they didn't always have that at Notre Dame. With all due respect to like Sebo and Jameer Smith, like they just didn't look like dudes.
Or even Kyron. I mean, yeah, exactly.
Very true.
Yeah.
Very true.
Did you see that picture of Did you see that picture after workout of it was Briley Mills and it was Audric Estime next to each other?
Yeah.
Oh man,
You're like, I want no part of that.
I want no part
of that.
No
Absolutely
smoke,
right.
sir. No smoke, sir.
Absolutely right. All right, let's get to some more questions. David Lowe asks, Brian, do you still think that Notre Dame is doing enough on the NIL side of things. I see the LL guys and the fans are saying they need to do way more. I have never said they're doing enough, David, ever. What I'm saying is they're doing a lot more than people think. The one thing I have said from the beginning is they need to do more to tout the things that are happening. But for some reason, Notre Dame has this thing where like talking about the things that are going on with NIL with their players is like some dirty thing, right? Like it's beneath them to speak on it. Why? Like, why? And now part of it is it's not my place to go tell you what Isaiah Foskey made last year or what Kyle Hamilton made last year. And I get all that, what Michael Mayer made. But to some degree, you want to do more to promote these deals. You don't have to give dollar amounts, but every time Michael Mayer signed with a new company, you should be advertising it as much as you legally can, or at least have people that do that type of thing. And so that's the thing for me is like it gets kind of a little like I had somebody at Notre Dame tell me like, well, yeah, you can have players on to talk about NIL, but you need to pay them to do that. I'm like, I'm giving them the space to talk about what they're doing NIL wise to support them, and you're telling me I got to pay them to do that? I'll tell you what, they'd make a lot more money coming on here for free than they will by me paying them and then nobody doing anything, right? So that's the stuff that's weird about it, Ryan. But there's still a lot of good things going on in the NIL space at Notre Dame. They're just not advertising enough, but they're still not where they need to be. And never said that they were. So again, this is a bit of a false narrative here about what I've said about NIL. Notre Dame is doing a lot more for NIL than people think.
Yeah.
For example, Ryan, you and I know a player that signed with Notre Dame who got close to over $1.5 million offer from another school. He didn't choose Notre Dame for free. Right? He's going to get some stuff from NILs related to Notre Dame. But it's not Notre Dame doing it. What I think Notre Dame needs to do is use their brand more to create some influences. And that's what I don't think they're doing enough of a job of. They're not engaged in like, look, it's a real thing. You know the rules. You want to live within the rules. Totally respect that. You're a religious institution. You should be following the rules. Flat out. But within the rules, there's a lot more you can be doing. But there's a lot more is here, and not doing anything is here. And I think some fans think it's one or the other. And what I'm saying is they're like right here. They're doing a lot more than people think, but they're not where they need to be. I've always felt that way. I've always said that way. It's
very tight-lipped with everything too. It's like if you're doing everything legally correct and you're helping people, why is that something that's like behind the scenes and not talked about at all? Like if I was Notre Dame and it's like, if I'm going to use Isaiah Foskey for an example, right? Like if Isaiah Foskey got a nice NIL deal from a company and Notre Dame, was helpful to him to trying to reach out to that company, for instance, that's legally fine. You didn't do anything wrong. You didn't give him any proper benefits. Why can't you talk about that? That just says that you're there for your players and that you're helping to serve them, and to help them be successful. I don't understand why that stuff is just so like taboo. Like you can't talk about that. Why? You're not legally breaking any rules. You're just helping people. Why are we not talking about that?
I don't know the specifics of what they can and can't do.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, to a degree, like Marcus Freeman I don't think can be out there and be like, well, Michael Mayer made X number of dollars last year. I don't think they can do that. But I don't think there's anything wrong with Notre Dame doing more to push total numbers or, general total numbers or listing all the companies maybe that our players had relationships with. There's a lot more that I'm confident they can do that they're not doing. And that's the thing is embrace NIL. If you want to embrace it legally, yes, good, you should. But don't just pretend like it's a thing you have to do, because this is what bothers me. It's like Notre Dame has always made this case. Jack Swarbrick's like, well, if players are going to be in this, they should be paid for it. And we believe in players make. Okay, but if you believe that, then why aren't you doing everything in your power to make sure that you're promoting that?
Right.
And that's the thing that I don't understand. It's like, are you just giving lip service to it? Right? Are you just giving us the political answer, or are you telling us what you believe? Because if you believe that, then you guys should be investing a lot more resources as part of the institution to do that. And not even just for football, but for all your student athletes. This is what we talked about last week, Ryan, when we talked about the SID and the communication aspects of Notre Dame. There are so many things they're not doing to promote these student athletes on social media. They do things, but it's like, well, we promote. No, but you don't do it enough, right? Like, do it more. I mean, just flood it. Get these kids'
Make them
names out
visible.
there.
Make them
Yes.
visible. Yeah.
Yes.
Right.
Use your platform. It's kind of like, I follow politics, but it's always like, and anytime there's like a presidential election period where one of the presidents is the incumbent, he has sort of this bully pulpit that the person contending who's not president doesn't have. Are you going to use that effectively or not, right? To get your message out. And that's where Notre Dame needs to be, is you have this bully pulpit because you're Notre Dame. Use it more.
Yeah.
And that's what I'd like to see them do more of.
Because they can. They have the resources to do it. I mean, you remember when Josh Adams was off to that great start and they did the 33 trucking stuff? It's like, that was awesome, man. Do more of that stuff. That's fantastic.
Right.
Like, you don't think that if Sam Hartman's putting up like just hellacious numbers and he's in like the Heisman conversation, you don't think Notre Dame is going to pump that up, man? Like, yes, they are. They should. You should, because that helps yourself. That helps your brand, but that helps Sam Hartman as well. Like, that helps a lot of different people. So I just think they need to do more of that stuff, man. Like, make this team visible. I want to know more about this team. I think that Notre Dame missed a little bit of the boat with the Michael Mayer, right? Like, we just had arguably the greatest tight end in Notre Dame history, a school that has traditionally put out so many great tight ends. And you heard from him, right? You saw his name, but like, man, you should have been pumping him up more, man. Like, that's your guy. That's an All-American. Like, let's get his name out there more. Like, I want to see his name as much as possible. And I feel like you missed the boat with some of that stuff sometimes.
Absolutely. Absolutely. All right, I got a couple more super chats here. We got one from Charlie Weiss's last belt. Luke, great feedback. My concern with some of these hires, what happens if it ends up being another Al Washington? Does he allow them to just stay around? Now, being fair, it's year 2 for Al, and he might flip the perception. Again, Charlie, that's all fair to talk about. That's totally fine. I mean, I'm not telling you have to agree with everything. I'm not. What I'm saying is there's 2 extremes. Agreeing with everything just because Notre Dame does it or says it, and then just because you have this negative view, then just everything becomes negative. About a couple things, everything becomes negative, right? And what I'm saying is some things be annoyed by. I am. Some things be pumped about. I am. But don't let the negatives now outshine all the positives. That's my thing. And then we're going to learn if Coach Freeman has the chops to tell people, hey, you got to go if they're not doing the job. And I don't know the answer to that. So it's clearly a concern. We're never said it's not a concern. It's just that doesn't have to be the only thing we talk about now. We can talk about other things. And when that topic comes up, it's like yesterday when you guys were doing the recruiting show. Somebody's like, oh, you can't talk about CJ. No, I'm saying you can talk about CJ Carr. All I'm asking is that you broach. I mean, if you're not sure of what's going on with CJ Carr, just say, hey, guys, what's up with CJ Carr visiting in March? Is he going to visit in March or not? Instead, it was, I'm really nervous and concerned about CJ Carr not being on the March visit schedule. No context as to why. So one way, appropriate. Let's talk about CJ Carr. Hey, Ryan, why don't you think CJ Carr is visiting for March? Well, my main question is because of his 7-on-7 schedule. And every weekend they're traveling around the country in a different – he's a big-time 7-on-7 guy. And it's hard to lock in a weekend because of all – so now – there may be legitimate reason to be concerned. Like, yeah, I'm a little concerned he's not been as active on social media, whatever. I mean, that may be it. But my answer is like, he's already said he's locked in no matter who they hire. So
yeah,
I don't need CJ to tweet every week that I'm locked in to stroke my sensitivities and my paranoia about it, right? That's not his job. He's got other things he's worried about right now. And so
yeah. Well, I was just going to say, but like if it gets to a point where other commits in the class aren't hearing from CJ and CJ's not recruiting dudes,
which has been what has happened every single time a kid starts to look around is the other commits start getting a vibe on it. Now, sometimes it's late, right? Like the Peyton Bowen thing was a fiasco last year, but the other situations weren't like that. That was unique, right? Like, so my whole thing is, there's also certain ways we can bring up conversations to ask things, right? Or to discuss things without immediately taking everything that happens with a 17-year-old and jumping off a cliff about it. Yeah. That's my whole thing is like, we don't need to just jump into, oh my God, the sky is falling territory. Let's have a conversation first. Perhaps we can give you some context that you didn't have before that'll make you feel better. At the end of the day, it's not CJ Carr's job to jump on Twitter once a week to reassure our feelings. That's not his job. We need to be grown-ups about this.
because there's a big difference between saying, "Hey Ryan" or "Hey Brian, what's the latest on CJ Carr? Have you heard anything?" That's a reasonable conversation. Starting a conversation like, "Man, he isn't on the visitor list for this month. Should we like? Come on,
This is
man.
really
That's not asking me a question. Like, ask me a question. We could talk about it."
And all I said was like, "Hey, we don't need to be like that, right?
Yeah.
Like, we don't need to be like that. That doesn't mean that there aren't some things to be concerned about, right? It's just that's kind of my thing. So Charlie, so like again, I have some of the same concerns you do, but those concerns about this hire aren't going to then make me be negative about everything else and just be in a constantly bad mood. I'm concerned about that. I'm excited about that. Excited about that. Excited about that. Concerned about that. We'll see how it plays out. And I hope the things that I'm concerned about get proven to be positives. I hope Al Golden kills it this year. I hope he crushes it this year.
Same.
He does a great job. I got my doubts, but I'm hopeful. And we can discuss the reasons I have my doubts, but then still do it in a way where let's also talk about the positive. Because, like, be honest, I don't love the hire at all. But you know what? Two things he's done a great job of. They block a mess of kicks, and his field goal kickers are money. That's pretty important, right? I mean, so we need to be able to have both of those conversations. That's all I'm asking for. Let's be grown-ups. Let's not do what a lot of other people do, which is you have to fall into this camp or that camp, and there can't, and then that has to, like, everything that that happens has to be seen through now this camp that I'm in, this tribe that I'm a part of. I now have to see everything through the lens of that tribe, and it just drives me freaking nuts. So that's my issue, Charlie. Mark went on with a super chat. Thank you, Mark. With the new position, whatever they call it, team managers, general manager, have you heard what all this position is for? NIL portal, etc. It's mainly for roster building, making sure that, because now it's not just recruiting, it's retention of players, it's pursuit of transfers. There's just a lot more to it, that you need someone on staff that just is devoted to that and not coaching or scouting or breaking down film or anything else. Just someone that's devoted to, we got to make sure we know where we are with all this kind of stuff. We got some more here from David Lowe. Do y'all think the receivers' production last year was more based on QB play or talent? And do y'all think Hartman will immediately elevate the talent of receivers? Let me just say this, Ryan. On the talent thing, the issue last year was never about talent. When you look from the receiver standpoint, the talent didn't always play well. There's a difference. The talent early, Jaden Thomas didn't lack talent early in the year. He wasn't running hard. He wasn't fighting for the ball. He wasn't playing sharp football. Lorenzo Styles never lacked talent. When he was dropping passes, hitting him right in the hands, it wasn't a talent problem. It was up here. It was the talent wasn't playing well. So the receivers, you can't blame everything on the quarterbacks last year. I'm not blaming Drew Pine when he hits Lorenzo Styles right perfectly in the hands on a crossing route where he's wide open. That's not Drew Pine's fault. That's Lorenzo Styles' fault. That also doesn't mean Lorenzo lacks talent. It means he lacked focus and concentration at times, and the talent wasn't resulting in production. But I do think the bigger problem as the season went on was the quarterback play.
Yeah.
I do think it is that. There's no doubt.
I mean, I think that there's David, I don't think it's ever like just one thing usually, right? Like usually it's a combination of things. The biggest thing is that, we expected last year the sophomore class to be the big producers from a wide receiver perspective. You thought it was going to be Lorenzo Styles, maybe Deion Colsey when he gets back and fully healthy, Jaden Thomas, and then obviously Tobias Merriweather is a freshman that we expected. I think the issue that you ran into, especially early on in the season, is that like they're still all young, right? Like they're still developing. They maybe weren't 100% ready for the limelight as far as being the guy offensively. Down the stretch of the season, though, you saw Deion get more consistent. You saw Jaden Thomas develop into probably their best receiver down the stretch. You saw young guys taking the next step. So I think that it was just more, especially early on in the season, it's a maturation thing. It was, we weren't talking about a bunch of juniors and seniors in this conversation. We were talking about sophomores and freshmen last year. Now this year, there's not that built-in excuse anymore. Most of them are juniors or sophomores, and they now have an extra year where that development needs to happen. So that's a big part of it is I think just that natural maturation of going from, I was super excited about Lorenzo Styles, but like at the end of the day, Lorenzo had a couple really nice games down the stretch of his freshman year, but like maybe he just wasn't ready to be the guy in 2022. Like maybe he wasn't ready for that. So the maturation, I think, is a big thing. quarterback play, certainly, especially, there was limitations with the passing game. We know that. So I think that there's a combination of a little bit of everything. This year, there's not a built-in excuse because those guys are a year older. You have a quarterback that has proven production and proven success on the college level. So if we go through a year of a wide receiver group not producing at a much higher level, then there's some type of issue that we need to look at, right? Maybe we're overestimating the talent there. Maybe, whatever it might be, the development of the position. I don't know. But regardless, is that there's not as much of a built-in excuse because there were some things, if we're being realistic and being fair, there were some things that maybe we underestimated from, Tyler Buckner getting hurt. You're playing with a backup quarterback, younger wide receiver group that still needed to mature. I do think that there were some things that prevented them from being as productive as they could have been last year. But this year, there's just not as much of a built-in excuse.
For me, Ryan, I think one thing that we didn't give enough respect to last year was how much losing Avery Davis was going to hurt. I just kind of thought that they'd be able to overcome it a lot easier than they did. And I think that was incorrect. I should have, because of because it's like one of those things where it's like we didn't pay enough. We didn't spend enough discussion time on, and we talked about it, but we didn't put enough warning signs about how, they kind of got to hit the inside straight with some of the stuff, know, and it wasn't one thing. It wasn't Avery Davis getting hurt. It wasn't Joe Wilkins getting hurt. It wasn't Lorenzo Styles underachieving. It wasn't Tobias not playing enough. It wasn't Tommy Reese's decisions. It wasn't coaching. It wasn't the quarterback getting hurt. It wasn't any of to your point, it wasn't any of those one things. What hurt Notre Dame is it was all of those things all happening together. Right. Deion Colsey getting hurt and missing development time. All of those things happened last year. That kind of led to Mitchell Evans being hurt in the offseason, who was going to be the number 2 tight end. Eli Raridan getting hurt. Like, they went through a lot last year, and it was all of it together. At the end of the day, too, it's like I can't spend every show talking about, but if these 13 things happen wrong, this team is going to go 9-4. I mean, there's certain things you should kind of assume. If they lose their best receiver and their starting quarterback and this and that and that and this and that, then yeah, they're probably going to not be as good as we think they're going to be.
And the wide receiver room had a big transition from a technical perspective because we talked about where that wide receiver room was left for Chancey Stuckey. Wasn't a talent issue. It was a numbers issue, and it was a lack of development issue. Yeah. And, I mean, early on in the season, I think we saw those growing pains, right? Like, Chancey Stuckey's trying to get the basics down. By the end of the year, you're like, wow, Jaden Thomas is breaking off some routes now, man. Like, he's really developed as a route runner. And those things are a natural
kid that I was calling to be benched in week 2.
And look,
right? Like,
best receiver
the way
down the
he
stretch.
played against Marshall, kid did not belong on the field. And then you watch him, what he became, and you're like, okay, that's what coaching is supposed to be about. And that's also says a lot about Jaden Thomas because he could have quit mentally after that second game. He was bad, but he didn't. He stayed confident. And like you said, Ryan, by the end of the year, Jaden Thomas was a pretty dang good football player by the end of the year.
Man. He was.
And it's good coaching, and it's also a kid that's got some mental toughness and some mental fortitude to fight through. Whereas Lorenzo Styles struggled to fight through his early season miscues. He allowed that to kind of get to him all year. Now he's got to learn from it and be better. So, there's a lot to it. Good question. Good question. Jason Smith asks, Ryan, he says, do you think Blake Fisher is still the left tackle if if Blake Fisher doesn't get injured?
Probably. I mean, as long as he continues to develop, because, I mean, he was obviously looking good and he won that starting job outright. So, I mean, I think that it's conceivable to think that you go through that initial season with Blake Fisher at left and Josh Lugg at right, and then maybe the next season a redshirt freshman Joe Alt is now the starting right tackle for the team when Josh Lugg gets moved inside. I think it's conceivable to think. I mean, long term, I think that it played out the way it should have as far as Joe Alt being the left tackle, Blake Fisher being the right tackle. But I mean, I wouldn't be shocked if Blake Fisher was still the left tackle because he had earned his opportunity to play that left tackle position. And if he was playing well, there's no reason to make a switch unnecessarily, in my opinion.
If Blake Fisher would have been healthy and Jeff Quinn was still the O-line coach, I would say yes. I think that when Harry came, I think that he would have made the move. Still would have made the move. Because it would have been easier to do that, Ryan, when you have a new coach. Hey, Blake, here's why I'm moving you to right side. And you have a reason for it. Because there's reasons why Blake should be on the right side that aren't negatives.
Yeah.
They're positives. And I think that that move probably still would have happened. Because I think the other thing, too, is we would have seen as a freshman some areas where Blake would have had some of the issues that Joe doesn't have, the technical things, stuff like that, where, I don't know if that would have gone well. I wouldn't be surprised if he stayed left tackle, but I think once the coaching move was made, I think you'd have seen a switch there, in my view. I do. Next question from Leighton Burkholder says, do you think it will be until fall camp for when we're able to see if Coach Stuckey has gotten Styles out of his funk? No. I think we'll start to see that this spring. And here's why I say that, Leighton. We started to hear some of those things last spring about how he was having the drops and some of those issues. If Lorenzo's out there in the spring making plays, then I'm gonna feel better. If he's consistently catching the football, I'm gonna feel better. Because here's the thing: if he hadn't done what he did in 2021, I'd say, yeah, I need to see it in games. The thing with Lorenzo is we've seen Lorenzo ball out in games. We saw him smoke Oklahoma State in a bowl game multiple times. We saw him make plays against Virginia and USC and North Carolina. We've seen Lorenzo be that guy. That's where all of Ryan and I's excitement came from, is look what he did the last 5-6 games of the year. This kid was pretty good, and so it'd be one thing if like with Tobias, still a lot of our feeling of Tobias is still projection. It's projecting what we think it could be. He's only caught one pass. With Lorenzo, it's more about let's get him back to what he was before he kind of lost his way. So if he's out there making those plays in practice, which is an area he struggled last spring and fall, then I'll feel a lot better that he's out of his funk. I will. Because Lorenzo's the type of guy, he never looked overwhelmed in games as a freshman. He never looked like the moment was too big for him or the spotlight was too big. I never saw that from Lorenzo. And I don't think that was his issue last year. I mean, he went for 54 yards on the first play of the game against his dad's alma mater. I don't think the moment was too big for him. I think he put a lot of pressure on himself. I don't think his attitude was always where it should have been, as far as he still had a lot to earn that I don't think he thought he should have to earn anymore. I think a lot of things kind of happen, which can happen with young players. Trust me, I've been there as a player where you think certain things as a young player that don't go your way. You don't always handle it the right way. I went through that as a player. So I think if those mistakes are behind him in March and April, Ryan, then I'm going to feel great about what Lorenzo is going to be in the fall, because I don't think him proving it in games is an issue. I think he's proven it in games. What we saw last year was the complete opposite of what he's already shown. That's why I have optimism that Lorenzo can get it turned around. This isn't a kid that had drops problems in high school and you hope he's going to be fine, and then he comes out as a sophomore and he has drops problems. This is a kid we've seen make tough catches in college football games. Now, I want to see him lay out for that one ball against Oklahoma State, but other than that, the kid caught the football really well as a freshman, in my view.
Yeah, and I mean, you've seen him in those videos this offseason, the workout videos, and it looks like he's working hard, man. Like I'm still very hopeful for Lorenzo Styles, because I think the kid is exceptionally talented. I really do. Sometimes, as a younger guy, it's hard to fight against adversity sometimes. It is. Sometimes that's just a maturity thing. He's a year older. He's going to have a clean slate, a little bit of a clean slate this offseason, as far as like, man, let's get back on track here, man. Like, spring ball is big time now. Let's go into the fall feeling good about ourselves, and let's see where the chips fall. Like, that's kind of where I am with Lorenzo Styles. I am cautious with it. I'm not going to buy into the hype this offseason, even though I know he's still very talented. But at the end of the day, man, he was only a true sophomore last year. He's only going to be a true junior this year.
Being thrust into the guy role. Yeah. I mean, that's the reality. He was thrust. When Avery went down, Lorenzo had to be that guy. And I just don't think he was ready for it. 100%. Now the expectation is he's not going to start this year. So he's coming at it from a completely different point of view, where the pressure's now gone for him. And just go ball. Just don't worry about all that other nonsense. Don't worry about you think you should be doing or shouldn't be doing. Just go ball. Because if you ball, the rest takes care of itself. It does. So that's kind of where I'm at with it, Ryan. That's where I'm at. We have a super chat down here from Christopher Morgan. Christopher says, so when I was talking about running backs in the offense, imagine with Sam Hartman a quarterback, with our stable of running backs and wide receivers coming in, I think we would be more balanced teams, and we'll have to think more. Prediction 2023, we average 43 points per game. That would shock me.
43 is a lot.
That would shock me. Like 43 points a game is an insane number when you play the schedule that Notre Dame plays. It really is.
What's the Notre Dame record? That has to be something
They
like
points per game. I think it's like 38, something like that. 36. There was a team. One of Era's teams set the record. I can't remember which year it was. I'll actually have to go back and look. I'll have it here before the end of the show. But the team that they had a couple years ago that averaged like 36 something. That set a Notre Dame record for total points in a season. And so that was the 2019 team, and they fired that offensive coordinator, by the way. Real smart move, their Coach Kelly. But yes, Ryan. So it's in the 30s. Like so, the 2000 is a 66. It was an Era team. So I think it was 68. They scored 37.6. That might be it.
If Notre Dame's
30, it's 37.6. Ryan is the record for points in a game.
If Notre Dame scores 43 points per game against the schedule that they have in front of them, they're going to win the national championship.
Easily.
I'll say that. Like
easily.
Yeah.
Easily. That's way too high for me. I mean, like I said, Georgia last year scored 41.1, and then the year before they were 38.6. I mean, you're talking about Clemson 2020 and LSU 2019 territory there. And I just, and look, there's teams that do that, right? Ohio State scored 44 and 45 points the last 2 years, right? Alabama scored 48.5 the COVID year. LSU scored 48.4. Those teams were insane, and those teams also had softer schedules than what Notre Dame's going to face. I'm sorry. And I know Ohio State fans won't want to hear this, but Ohio State, the Big Ten's not good. It's just not. It's not good. They pad stats against really bad teams. Now, does that mean Ohio State doesn't have an elite offense? They do. And I think the other thing, too, is when you consider they scored 44 points a game with Jackson Smith and Jigba playing like 2 games last year, and Travion Henderson being hurt almost the whole year, and then Maya Williams going down, and Evan Pryor went down. Like, I'm not trying to take away from them. I'm just saying you put them in the SEC, they're still an elite offense. They're just an elite offense that scores about 4 or 5 points fewer a game. That's all I'm saying, right? And so that's kind of my point on that, right? It's 43 points per game for the way that Notre Dame, and they're kind of a tempo team. They run a lot. Notre Dame's not that way. So 43 is a lot. If Notre Dame gets to 38 or above, that's outstanding.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a school record. That's outstanding against the schedule they play. Because if y'all think their schedule was tough this year, next year's schedule has a better combined record of what teams did in 22 than the 22 schedule had. And yeah, it's going to be a challenge. So 43 is really optimistic, but I think Ryan is right. If Notre Dame's scoring 43 points a game next year, they're winning the national championship. If that's their average by the end of the year, they're winning a national championship, unless their defense is just god awful, which I don't think that it will be.
I mean, it can't be that bad. To
me, the defense won't be worse than it was last year.
Sure.
And the reality is the defense was the defense was the primary reason for one loss last year. Sort of.
Yeah.
And that's USC. I thought they had a terrible game plan against USC. But the offense still had chances of getting back in the game. The defense choked in the fourth quarter against Ohio State, choked in the fourth quarter against Marshall, and gave the game away in the fourth quarter against Stanford. That's true. But in each one of those games, for the entire game, the offense was the problem. Look, did they choke away the fourth quarter against Ohio State? Yes, but they still held them to 21 points. They held a team that scored 44 points on the entire season to 21 points. That's your offense's problem. They lost to Marshall. The defense only gave up 19 points to Marshall. That's it. The defense only gave up 16 points to Stanford. That's it. So for as much as we bang on Al Golden, and a lot of it's justified. I mean, I don't think he did a great job last year. Didn't do a great job relative to how good they've been in the past. This is what kind of gets me sometimes. It's like, if I say something critical, some people will take it and like run with it as if it was like Brian Van Gorder. It's like, whoa, hold on a second. It wasn't as good as what Mike Elko, Clark Lee, and Marcus Freeman did, but let's not jump off a cliff and turn it into this. You didn't lose 4 games last year because of the defense. You didn't. Now, the defense didn't do enough in those games to win either, but you lost because your offense. If Notre Dame is a legit 38-point per team game last year, legit, they're 11-1, if not 12-0. If the defense doesn't change a lick, Ryan, if the defense is exactly what it was last year, but you have the 2015 offense. Notre Dame's undefeated last year. No question. No question.
I think we need to establish a Brian Van Gorder line, by the way. Like, Brian Van Gorder's right down here. Greatness is somewhere up there, right? Like, there needs to be a line that even is like approaching Brian Van Gorder. Like, we need to make a line there and establish a middle ground, because it's it's either you're really good or you're Brian Van Gorder. It's like, there's a lot of levels in between.
And Al Golden last year was not in the same universe as what Brian Van Gorder was. He wasn't that far away from the previous coaches. It just wasn't up to the standard it should have been, and it was unforced errors as to why it went that way. That was more my frustration.
Al Golden definitely cleared the Brian Van Gorder line last year. Yes, he was nowhere near that line.
If Al Golden was Notre Dame's defensive coordinator in 2015, that team's probably undefeated.
Right.
I'm sorry. So let's just, not that Christopher's saying that, but I think 43 points per game is a little. Oh yeah, it's a little optimistic for me.
I'm here for it though, man.
But I love it. I hope this. Hey, again, Ryan. I hope I'm wrong. I love when I'm wrong when it's about stuff like that,
dude. I know you have a new quarterback potentially this year and everything, but like if Jared Parker takes a 31 point per game team and then transfers into a 43 in his first year, like, oh man,
Royals Award.
Yes,
exactly. Mark won with a super chat. Thank you, Mark. Is Notre Dame giving your team much opportunity to view spring ball and player availability for interviews? We don't know what the spring availability is going to look like at this point in time, so I don't know. We will have interviews, so as soon as our show's over tomorrow, we'll be heading over to Notre Dame. They're going to have player availability tomorrow. Well, I will. Ryan's not going to be leaving Jersey to get there in time. He'll be a little late. So, but I will. Sean Stires and I will be there to cover that. But as far as practice availability, Mark, I honestly don't know what we're going to have.
I'll just do the I'll do this show on the road, and I'll just drive the 11 hours to
Yep, absolutely. All right. So Archer said, hey, we can all play that game. Pair last year's Ohio State offense with their 2019 defense, and they win every game by 2 scores. You're kind of missing the point, Archer. We're trying to say, give context to he wasn't as bad as people make him out to be. That's the whole point. So it'd be kind of like saying, if you're going to look at the two better examples, the 2021 Ohio State offense. If the 2021 Ohio State offense had the 2019 Ohio State defense, I think they win the national championship. There's not a doubt in my mind, Ryan, that they win the national championship. But the point is it's to say, hey, we can be frustrated with how the defense was, but it wasn't abysmal, right? Like, that's the whole point. Like, you can say what you're saying about last year's defense. Last year's defense was not championship level, but it was way better than it was the year before, right? I mean, I think we should all be able to agree with that. And it's simply to say we can be critical of something, but let's have some context here, because you're acting like this guy was a bum. Al Golden was not a bum. He didn't do a good enough job. Simple as that. But we can take that didn't do a good enough job and take it way too far. So now we're being obnoxiously hyperbolic. And I just don't want to be that guy. Right. So that's my 2 cents. Archer 452 also says, what is your favorite non-standard number position combo? Quarterback Devin Brown, this is at Ohio State, changed his number to 33 in honor of Sammy Ball. All I'm going to say is I just hope he doesn't start this year, because I do not want to watch a quarterback wearing number 33. Can I just tell you how much I hate watching quarterbacks when they have numbers under 20? Like when Heath Schuler.
You mean over 20? You mean over 20?
When they're wearing something other than under 20. Yes.
Gotcha.
So like Jared Lorenzen had a number over that.
He was 20, I think.
Heath Schuler, I hated it.
Doug Flutie was 20.
Remember when Devin Gardner switched to 98? Now,
yeah.
Again, it was for a good reason. It was to honor Tom Herman, I think is who it was. It was Tom Harmon, who's actually Mark Harmon's dad, by the way, who's Jethro Gibbs from NCIS. His dad was actually, whose number that was. He's a great football player at Michigan. Was it dad or grandpa? I think it was his dad, yeah. But I don't like it. I think it looks weird. I don't want to see it, to be honest with you. So go Kyle McCord. Let's win that starting job, buddy. But I mean, I respect the kid for honoring a legend of the past. That's all cool. I have no problem with that. I don't want to look at it.
Do you have a favorite combo? I love nose tackles in the single digits. I think that's fantastic. Yeah. Fantastic.
Oh, for me, anytime a linebacker or defensive lineman is a single digit guys, for me, is it?
Oh, man, I like linebackers with 44, man. 44 linebackers.
That's because you're a former linebacker. I just think it makes you look like an athlete. I think it makes you look like a stud. Like Manti wearing number 5 just added to that mystique. Jalen wearing number 9. Stephon wearing number 7. If you're here's the thing though, Ryan. If you're going to be a single digit guy and play D line or linebacker, you better be a dude, because otherwise your averageness will stand out a lot more.
There's never been a player that wore number 1 where he didn't at least look like a dude, right? You're like, oh, he's wearing number 1. He's pretty good.
So Notre Dame released their newcomer roster, and they had Javonte Jean-Baptiste wearing number 1. And I hope that doesn't change, because I'm so sick of talking about, why don't they wear the number 1 jersey? Because it was so stupid when they got rid of that thing. And he did it because Brian Kelly did that thing that one year where he's like, different players are going to wear number 1. That started in 2016.
Yeah.
And then it didn't work, and they were disaster. And he blamed the number 1 somehow for we're never going to wear number 1 again until we're back to number 1. Hey, bro, the reason that we're not there is it's your fault, right? I mean, we fell under that during your tenure. Okay. So, but it's just dumb. And now hopefully they get rid of it. And yeah, I got a thing I like too, as far as number combos. I like numbers where the best guy here gets that number. Like, remember Temple did something under Matt Rule?
They still do it. Yeah.
They still do that.
They do the single digits is for toughness or whatever. Yeah.
And then there's other places where, if you're the best linebacker, you get this number because, I think stuff like that's pretty cool. Or
LSU with the 7 and the 18 jerseys. Yeah.
But for me, as far as just like that, it's D linemen and linebackers that wear single digits. And that goes all the way back to, for me as a fan, Corey Minor, some of those guys that played for, LaRon Cobbins, he wore number 6. He just looked like a dude wearing number 6. You know what I mean? I've always liked that.
I used to love, Lewis Nix was rocking 1, Stephon Tuitt was rocking 7. Man. Yeah, man.
Yeah. Tyler Erig says, Ryan, as a linebacker, which current or former Notre Dame player would you not want to meet one-on-one in the open field?
See, this question can be taken 2 different ways, Tyler. I mean, because most people would think that that's saying, who is going to truck stick me, right? But, I would actually be more worried about being with a fast player at the open field, that's got some moves personally. Mm-hmm. But if I'm going, truck stick, current right now, I would not want to meet Audric Estime with a head of steam. Absolutely not. Jerome Bettis, I would not want to meet those guys with a head of steam. Rocket Ishmael is a guy in the open field I would not want to see, because he'll make me look really, really stupid. Golden Tate's another one that would make me look really, really
question, Ryan.
Stupid.
Would you rather get run over or juked out of your jockstrap?
I would rather get run over than juked. Okay. Yeah, juke's embarrassing, man. They fall on your face like you're hugging air. So it would be, in that case, it would be Rocket Ishmael or it'd be Golden Tate, because they would make me look stupid in the open field.
That's my thing. It's I'd rather you just, hey man, you're 30 pounds bigger than me. Of course you ran me over, as opposed to I'm not athletic, which is what that kind of that vibe that thing gives across. That is yeah. I've always thought NBA, you'll see these NBA highlights where it's guys just dunking on people. To me, that's not nearly as embarrassing as one of my favorite highlights is Bird hits Dominique with a jab, step back, and Dominique falls down, and Bird just looks at him for a second and then drains it. It's I just took your manhood on that one. You know what I mean?
You remember when You remember when AI crossed up Jordan as a rookie? That was nice, man.
That to me is oh man, as opposed to dunking on someone. I don't know. It's the same thing for football. So. And other people just they don't want to get dunked on.
There are some disrespectful dunks out there, man. There are some disrespectful ones though.
Yes. Nathan Milton says, thought unproven. I think wide receiver is our best offensive unit this year. I would not predict it, but I also wouldn't I'd be surprised if that happened, but I wouldn't be shocked. Does that make sense, Ryan?
I would say that there's a reality where that happens, but I think the more likely reality is that it's offensive line, maybe quarterback, running back. It's so close, Nathan, honestly, because I think when we get to the defensive side of the football, I think there's clear tiers as far as what's good and what's troubling, right? On offense, it's running back's pretty good. Quarterback should be pretty good. Offensive line should be good. And then it's wide receiver might be last on that list of proven commodities, but I still expect wide receivers to be a good unit. I still do. So it's an interesting conversation though, just because I feel they're a lot closer together than what we see on the defensive side of the ball right now.
I wanted to bring something up because this is really cool. Andy Norm says, no question here, but a proud dad of 3 new Irish fans. After 30 years childless, my wife and I just adopted a sibling set of 3 here in Ohio. They don't like OSU and already love Notre Dame. Blessed. Hey, that is great, Norm. Congratulations very, very much. My cousin went through something like that a few years ago, and I know it can be a challenge, man. We're happy for you, praying for you, and very excited for you. My wife and I are childless, and sometimes I'm okay with it, and sometimes I'm not. So I'm real happy for you. I kind of love the fact that you just also planted 3 new Irish fans like in enemy territory. I think that's awesome. Yeah. I love that. But we're happy for you, Norm. That's great, man. Congratulations. Absolutely. Congratulations. David Jones says, Brian and Ryan, if Gino Guidugli turns out to be a quote-unquote quarterback whisperer, how surprised would you be if Steve Angeli makes the biggest, most impressive jump of the QBs? I'd be surprised. I think Tyler Buchner mechanically because it's about mechanics, right? And I think Tyler Buchner would be the guy that would make the biggest jump. I don't think Steve Angeli had bad technique. I just don't think he's super talented.
He's just like a solid solid talent. He's not like an extraordinary talent. I mean, I think we see that the same way. It's Tyler Buchner's athleticism and talent level is probably the furthest apart on the quarterback roster from like what his technical side is as far as being advanced there. If those 2 things meet, Tyler Buchner's going to be a dang good football player, man, if he can stay healthy. Like he's got a lot of room to grow. So I think that he's the guy that I would lean to in that conversation as well. Like Steve Angeli, like I just think if he's president of duty, he's just going to be solid, man. I just question if there's like much more than solid, like that's my thing with Steve.
And I hope I'm wrong because he seems like a great kid. I mean, I've been around him twice around the football program. Very engaging, very smart kid.
And he's a Jersey guy, man.
He's a Jersey guy, came from a good school, showed in the spring. Again, it's a spring game, but showed me in the spring he's got some poise to him. He's got some swagger to him. So I'd have no problem with that being the case. It's not something I would predict, and I'd be a little surprised by it.
Yep.
All right, let's run through some more. Jason Smith, do you think Tyler Buchner gets called in the red zone?
I mean, it's possible. I wouldn't be against there being some type of package, but I just don't think that it's something that I wouldn't put him in every single red zone opportunity that Notre Dame's in next year, right? It's just against certain teams. Maybe if they're a little bit slower on the second level, maybe if they're a team that, likes to crowd the box a little bit and guys that you 100% know are going to play man coverage, like then I'm getting Tyler Buchner in the game because I think that there's an advantage that I could create there. But that doesn't mean that every single red zone opportunity next year, I'm just going to go, hey, Tyler, you're in the game. Like that situation. As soon
as you get inside the 20, you're putting him in the game. Yeah, and kind of talked about this earlier. There's some games I wouldn't necessarily do it, and other games I absolutely would.
Like if it's a slower team on the second level and they play a lot of man coverage, like heck yeah, buddy, get in there. Like
any man coverage team in the red zone, I'm going to strongly look at it. But if you're a team playing a lot of zone, I don't know if I want to put Tyler in the red zone in that situation. Here's why. Coming off the bench, not getting live action during the game, zone defenses can kind of throw you off. Whereas if it's man, I pick my guy, I make my pre-snap read, and then bam, I'm throwing off of that guy. Like that's what you bring a guy off the bench to do, or to throw an RPO or a bubble screen or to run. So man, I'm doing it. But if it's a team that does a lot of zone coverages or rolling things or messing things around, I don't see anything in regard to justification for why I'd want to bring in a younger guy that hasn't played in that game into that scenario. I wouldn't want to do it. But man teams that don't have a lot of talent on the perimeter, teams that I can manipulate into heavy personnel when I go 12, definitely doing it in those situations. So that's what I would do personally. All right, let's get to a few more here, Ryan. I know you got to run here soon. Here's one from Anthony Solomon. Do you actually we kind of talked about that. Yeah. Here's a quick one. Keith Wiegand, is David Sherwood a scholarship or is he a walk-on? He's a scholarship player now. So yes, he is the scholarship player.
It's great for him, man. Great for him.
Yep. Tommy Guns asks, Ryan, what do you think that the brain trust in Nashville is thinking and looking for? If it's true that Derrick Henry is on the trading block, what might their strategy be?
I mean, Tommy, their strategy is that he's a 29-year-old running back. Like that's the strategy, man.
He's
like
taking a pounding.
Yeah, man. He has run the ball. I mean, Brian, have you ever seen? You saw his. I'm sure you've seen his high school numbers when he was in I forget what high school he was in Florida, but like so much tread on the tires. I know he didn't play, like he played his first couple years at Alabama, but wasn't like the guy until his final year. So like that saved a little bit of tread. But that guy's run the football a lot over the last 10 to 15 years, man, a lot. So Tommy, I actually think it's smart, man. I know some people would disagree with this, but like that offense for Tennessee, they need a little bit of a reset, man. Like they got an old quarterback in Ryan Tannehill. They got their best player is now 29-year-old at a position that doesn't usually get over 30 very often, right? And a guy that's had a lot of tread on his tires. I think it's smart to try to get what you can for Derrick Henry. Like I think it is, because I think that offense needs a little bit of a reset. He's a guy that's starting to get a little more injured over the last couple of years than what he did early on in his career. And at the end of the day, man, 30-year-old running backs in the NFL historically just don't usually last that long.
Today's game. And 20 years ago, Ryan, I disagree with you. 20 years ago, I said, this guy's got 3 or 4 really great years left. You build around him because the game was different. In today's NFL, I agree with you. I don't, it's part of the reason I don't like watching the NFL. But in today's NFL, a 29-year-old power back that's had over 1,000 carries in the last 4 years alone, that missed half a season in 2021. And to your point, you're not a wrinkle here, wrinkle there, addition here. It's not like John Elway, right? His last 2 years, they were, man, go out, add this guy, add that guy. You're a Neil Smith, this guy away from taking that next step. That's not where the Titans are. You know, like Denver was the number 1 seed in 1996, got knocked out early by the Jaguars. They were like, make a couple pieces, get them right, and then you're a championship team. Titans aren't there, I don't think, Ryan. And so it's going to take you a couple years to get there. Yeah. And if you do get there in a couple years, now he's a 31-year-old running back, right? And there is no value from a trade standpoint. Yep. So to your point, I think part of it is determined by where are you as a team. If you're a couple changes away from being a playoff team, then you ride that horse, in my opinion. But to your point, Ryan, they're not. They're not a good offseason away from being a Super Bowl team, in my view.
Yeah, they need to reset offensively, man. Like they need to figure out what long-term the quarterback position looks like, because Ryan Tannehill's depleting.
Hammered by Titans fans on Twitter. Shocker. When they signed him to that deal, I said they're going to regret the heck out of this deal because he ain't that guy.
Yeah. And
that's a big part. To me, if you don't have him under that huge deal, I don't know if there's the need to necessarily trade Derrick Henry now. But you're a mess right now at this point in time. You've got 2 guys, running back and quarterback, making a mess of money. One of them's getting older. The other one's not good, at least not that good to what his money's making. And that was the mistake I said Denver made when they traded for Russell Wilson. It's bad enough you gave up 2 first-round draft picks. Then you're giving them $40 million a year. So if you give up the draft picks, you're like, okay, but you can still go do some things in free agency. Now you've done that and you're paying a $40 million. Now you can't go sign the free agents you need, and you don't have the draft capital you need to go out and make those moves. And, you know, you got to be real careful. I always respect the teams that are willing to let a quarterback walk who's going to make a ton of money, but he's not worth that money.
Well, it's
I respect that.
Tennessee just last offseason wasn't able to kind of put the money up for A.J. Brown. It's like you just let a 24-year-old stud wide receiver walk out the door because you overpaid for a solid quarterback and gave him, you know, great money at the quarterback position, and you overpaid for, well, you're not overpaying. Derrick Henry was a good player, but like you're putting too much assets, in my opinion,
you're paying top dollar for a running back.
Yeah.
In an era where that's just not,
it's not good. It's not good money.
Right. And that's like the Giants, right? And
or the
they're
Cowboys.
A lot of money.
A
lot of money to Daniel Jones. I just saw the Giants are going to re-sign Daniel Jones, and I'm like, I want to see what kind of money he's making, because it's like now, but see, that's what the NFL's become, and it's one of the reasons I don't like it is you don't have to be that good in the NFL to make a crap load of money as a quarterback.
Yeah.
It's because it's so quarterback starved. And it's just like Daniel Jones shouldn't be making anywhere same universe as guys like, you know, the best quarterbacks in the league, just nowhere close. But
they asked for $48 million a year to start, and the Giants were like, nah,
no. Joe Parr says, what I'm excited about is when I think about how Jack Cohn started ripping people apart with the RPO game. I think Hartman will be even better and then add that established running game. I don't disagree with you.
No.
I don't disagree with you. Joe Medina says, Joe, could you do me a favor? Is it Medina or Medina? Because I know like it can be pronounced both. I know the city in Ohio is Medina, and I don't know if this is Medina. So if you can let me know that, I want to make sure I'm pronouncing your name correctly. Is there a reason Tyree was not the punt returner? I think his shiftiness and speed would help our punt return become much more explosive. Ryan, I don't think Chris Tyree is overly shifty. I think he's explosive.
Yeah, he's explosive.
I don't think he's a punt return type. I think he's more of a straight line, make one. He's a one cut and go runner to me.
He's a kick returner. He's a kick. That's the biggest difference between kick returners. Kick returners are one cut, straight line speed. Like that's what a kick returner is. The punt returners are more the guys that are going to shake you a little bit in the open field, right? Like the guys that kind of have that quick twitch, change of direction type of style. Like that's more what the punt returners are. I don't consider Chris Tyree that type of guy as well. He's a one cut guy.
Yeah. Yep. Brendan Manning, a little late. Sorry if asked already. Who's the better NFL prospect? This will be for you, Ryan. Logan Diggs or Audric Estime? And am I the only one who would love to see them both go pro next year? Hashtag let the young bucks eat. So, Ryan, can you address the first part? Because I'd like to answer the second part.
It's funny because I think that some people would kind of assume that it's probably Logan Diggs because he has the all-around profile. But I've actually talked to a couple scouts about this already, and scouts that I had talked to actually prefer Audric Estime's style and kind of his profile a little bit more than what they've seen of Diggs so far. So I think that it really is dependent on what scheme you're going to, though, because I think that they're going to be all over the board as far as like if I'm a gap power system, right, that really wants to get downhill and be physical. I think all those teams are going to prefer Audric Estime, right? But if it's more of a outside zone, inside zone approach consistently, then that's probably more of the Logan Diggs type of style. But, from the early conversations, I actually think that there's a little bit more love for Estime. Not that there's no love for Diggs. It's not what I'm saying at all. It's just, I think it really is going to be dependent on the scheme that teams run.
Second part, would I love to see them both go pro next year? Yes. And the reason I say that is because if they both go pro next year, the odds are they had great years. And that's good for Notre Dame. And now Notre Dame is in a situation where they can just kind of restock. It's Jadarian Price, it's Jeremiah Love, it's then you have Aeneas Williams coming in and another back coming in. Hopefully for me, it's Kedron Young. I love that kid. I'd love to see him be the number 2 back coming in. You'd have Jabron Payne. So they're in a position where they could lose both of those guys, and then they'd probably lose Chris Tyree, who will be a senior next year. But yeah, I'd love to see them both go pro because of what it would mean for this year. But selfishly, I'd kind of like one of them to come back in 24, just to give them a little something. But if they both leave, it's most likely if they both go pro, most likely the odds are that they had a great year, and that means Notre Dame's going to be really good.
And that's better for them long term as well if they are able to get drafted, right? Because running back, we just talked about Derrick Henry. Like the running back window is so limited now that, like, man, you need to try to get to that second contract as best as you possibly can, and jump starting that is always a good thing as long as guys can stay healthy.
Yep. Last few, Ryan. A-Bent ND says, had Brian Kelly not left, how bad would the situation be at receiver right now? I cannot understand how he allowed that room to deteriorate so badly. It'd be in a really rough spot because they wouldn't have all the guys in the roster they currently have.
Yeah.
The guys would have left. And they definitely wouldn't be bringing in the 4 receivers that they're bringing in.
You 100% would not have the 3 Texas guys in the class. Like 100% you wouldn't have them.
Not one of them.
Probably not Flores
not
either.
One
so,
of them.
Yeah.
Yeah. You'd have Malik LZ. And, who's a nice player, but no. Yeah. Broke Neck Boy says, I never understood all the personnel numbers until now. Thanks for that. You're welcome. What are the schools that could consider themselves tight end U besides Notre Dame? I always see Iowa and Miami in the conversation. I think those two deserve it. I don't think Miami as much just because it's been a while since they've produced a big time tight end. But Miami's had some years now where they've produced some pretty good tight ends.
If we're talking about like early 2000s, Miami was insane. Jeremy Shockey and Bubba Franks and Kellen Winslow Jr. And like that was a wild stretch. More recently, Iowa just had 2 tight ends drafted in the first round in the same draft, right? Like a few years ago. Right. Sam Laporte is a pretty well-liked prospect this year that'll probably go somewhere on day 2, most likely. So
Hey Ryan, Miami-wise, how's Brevin Jordan doing so far?
He actually had a pretty good rookie year 2 years ago, and I think he was banged up this year, so I don't think he had a ton of production this year.
David Njoku's kind of started to come around a little bit.
He's a good player. He's a good player now.
He was another guy from there.
Yeah.
Jimmy Graham was another Miami guy that did really well. Yeah. Greg Olson was a first-round pick. He's another guy. I'm just going through some of these, like you said, Kellen Winslow and Jeremy Shockey, I think, or like in 2 guys in a 3-year span. Bubba Franks was also a first-round pick. But theirs is a little bit more recent, last 20 years-ish kind of thing. Iowa to me, again, also a tad recent to me. I think that's why, like you said recently, and I honestly, I don't really care what guys do in the NFL. The fact that Hawkinson hasn't really panned out or whatever like that, they're still producing really good college tight ends. George Kittle's pretty flipping good.
Hey, Dallas Clark back in the day too, in like the early 2000s.
They've had some guys. Scott Chandler is pretty good college tight end. But to me, the thing that puts Notre Dame over the top is Notre Dame's had some legendary guys at tight end, and they've produced so many high draft picks. Now, they went through their own stretch there where all the tight ends they were producing were like lower round guys. But you're going to have Michael Mayer's probably be round one this year, Tommy Tremble, Cole Kmet. I mean, Notre Dame had guys that were Brock Wright was so buried in the depth chart that he couldn't play, but he goes to the NFL and he's a starter for the Lions now, and a solid player, and I love, because he's a great kid. I'm so happy for him. But you're going back to not just the recent stretch we all know about Tyler Eifert, Kyle Rudolph, John Carlson, Anthony Fasano, but you're going all the way back, like back in the day, Ryan, when you're talking about they're producing the Mark Bavaros. You had that stretch under Lou Holtz. You had Irv Smith and Derek Brown and Oscar McBride. But then you go back to Mark Bavaro back in the 84 team. Tony Hunter was the number 12 overall pick in that 83 draft, which was the famous the quarterback draft with John Elway and Dan Marino and all those guys. Ken McAfee back in the day was the number 7 overall pick, coming out. Dave Casper. I mean, so Notre Dame just for decades has been doing this. And that's why I just don't think anyone can contend with that. Miami's had a couple stretches. Notre Dame's been doing it for longer than I've been alive, and it's not slowing down. It's not slowing down at all. John A1, is there a hierarchy of communication between assistant coaches and coordinators? For example, would a QB coach need to have more direct communication with an OC than a receivers coach? Depends on what the roles are. If your quarterback's coach is on the field and your receivers coach is up in the booth, then no, the receivers coach is going to have more to say and be the first one to talk. But it just depends on the makeup of that. Jason Rose, what does Dylan Chancey, Chris O'Leary all staying at Notre Dame mean for Freeman? It means that he has a lot of coaches that are coveted but want to stay. I mean, that's what it means. I mean, we wrote about this with Brian Mason, Ryan. That was not an easy thing for Brian Mason to do because he did not want to leave Coach Freeman. But it'd be like if I was coaching somewhere else and Notre Dame called me, I'm taking it. It's my dream job. Right. That's what the Colts were for Brian Mason. It was his dream job. He's from Indianapolis area. He grew up a huge Colts fan. That is his Notre Dame for him.
Sure.
And I've got nothing but respect for and his fan. Here's the thing too. You gotta remember, he's a father of young children, and his family all lives there. And he's on the road a lot. He's doing all those things. Now his wife gets to be around her family. His kids get to be around the grandparents and the aunts and the uncles. And that's so important. So important. Yeah. Last couple things. Do you think that Coach Mike Mickens and company are able to flip Caleb Beasley? If I had to predict now, I'd say no. Yeah. I'd say no, but it's possible.
Sure.
Last two questions, Ryan. Irish 452. Is the 92 Dream Team, you may not be able to say this because this is before your time, but is the 92 Dream Team the greatest team ever assembled across all sports? I'll say this. If we're not talking about all-star games, then I'd say yes, because you're talking about some of the greatest to ever play, and just you're talking about like 4 or 5 top 10 all-time players potentially on that team with Magic and Larry and Michael and guys like that. You're talking about some of the greatest to ever play the game on one team, and with the exception of Bird, they were all still in their prime for the most part. Magic was like on the downslide. He had the HIV thing. And so Magic and Bird weren't in their prime, but everybody else was still in their prime. And man, that was a unbelievable collection of talent. And I don't think any of the Dream Team since can compete with what that team was, in my opinion.
Olympics is so unique too, because you're taking the best players, but it's not an all-star game, right? Like that's kind of why the Olympics is such a unique thing. I mean, off the top of my head, I can't really think of anybody that's even close, really.
Yeah. All right, let's get this last one real quick here, Ryan. This is a fun one from Christopher Walters. Brian, how did you get on Kelly's bad side? I mean, I didn't kiss the ring. I mean, that's really what it boils down to. I mean, it's why I'll probably eventually get on Marcus Freeman's bad side. My job is to give you honest. You guys are who I'm accountable to, not Brian Kelly, not Jack Swarbrick, not Marcus Freeman. As much as they want to believe that, I don't answer to them. I answer to you all. And I answer to myself and I answer to my God. And those are the people that I answer. I don't answer to Marcus Freeman or Brian Kelly or anybody else. That's really what it comes down to. Brian Kelly wanted to control every little thing that people said and did, and I just didn't play that. And there got to a point in time where I started to have some kind of influence, and he didn't really like that. And that's really what it comes down to. So that's really all it is to me. So yeah, that's really it. That's really it. Ryan, last thing I just want to respond to this. Timeout Tom says, I feel the jury's still out on Coach Stuckey's coaching skills. He's an excellent recruiter, but Prine's skills limited wide receiver production. I want to see it on the field before I'm all in. I think this is a misguided notion, Ryan. I think production being a problem is only a problem if the receivers were the reason for the lack of production. You can watch a game and watch all 22 and tell if a group of receivers are coached well or not, whether the ball comes to them or not. How do they get off routes? How do they run their routes? How do they break off their routes? How do they get off the press? How do they handle blocking? Do they play with proper angles? Do they do all the things that coaching is determined? Yes. Whether or not the quarterback throws them the ball, like when I'm grading my receivers in college, Ryan, I don't not grade them if the ball didn't come their way. I still grade them on everything they had control over. And by the end of the year, the receivers were playing at a very high technical level for their age and for where they were at the beginning of the year. And to me, that is absolutely on coaching. Absolutely on coaching. And I don't need you to throw me to football for me to be able to tell if my guy did things the right way. Agree or disagree with that, Mr. Roberts, as we wrap this up?
No, I mean, I think that's the same thing with evaluating cornerbacks on the other side of the ball. It's like I'm not just evaluating the plays that the ball comes their way. I'm evaluating every single rep. So, I mean, Tom, I think that also there's some decent proof, man. Like wide receivers from a technical perspective got a lot better than where they were the previous years at Notre Dame, obviously, right? And then when you look at what he did at Baylor, I mean, the year before Baylor and the year after Baylor, Coach Stuckey did a pretty dang good job as far as getting Tyquan Thornton and those cats to be a lot better. So I thought I saw a lot of good things. I agree that like you want to see it take a next step up, but like, sure. Yeah, he showed me.
But there's only so much of a step you can take in 1 year, Ryan. And you want to know the one route that to me signifies all the growth that he did? There's one route this season that showed me this is why he did a great job. It was Braden Lindsey's slant route against South Carolina, where he beat that guy. He like jabs him up, sticks him outside, and then beats him inside to convert a third down. Never saw that before under receivers under Coach Alexander. You definitely didn't see that from Braden Lindsey. Like that was the epitome of that's a well-coached kid with talent. That's what that was. Much more so than the bomb. That him running by dudes is Braden's always done that. That just is about speed. But it was such a technically precise route at the snap, at the top end, at the catch point that you're like, that's a kid that's coached well. Now he has talent. That's a really well-coached kid. And Jaden Thomas had a couple routes like that in that game too. That little angle corner that he ran to get open on that big play, that was very well done technically. And so I have to give him a lot of credit for that. And again, you want to know another reason why I hate the NFL? Geno Smith just got $105 million in 3 years. $52 million.
It was when they broke it down though with like backloading and stuff. Though it was only $25 million a year for a starting quarterback.
That's still way too freaking much. That's why
I mean, $25 million for Geno or $40 million for Daniel Jones though. Like
neither
Geno all day.
None of the above.
Geno's way better than him though. He's way better.
But it's none of the above. It's none of the above. Oh goodness gracious. Anyway, that's crazy money. Ryan, thank you so much, Roman, for being with me today. We'll be back tonight. Obviously, IB Nation Sports Talk will be here. Tomorrow, Ryan and I will be back for a show. We're going to break down the defense, kind of take it from the same angle that we took it today. What are the things we like about the defense? What are the strengths that they have? What are the concerns they have? We'll do another football 101, and then tomorrow, and then we'll dive into the mailbag, and then Thursday we'll kind of break down the position battles that are going to rage this spring. That'll be fun. We'll get to that as well. So before you leave, folks, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit the notification bell, share this podcast. If you're listening via podcast, please give us a 5-star review. Sign up for the message boards at boards.irishbreakdown.com. Check out the merch store down below. You can see the link to our merch store. Get our hats, our shirts, all types of gear. I just bought a new mouse pad that I'm going to be putting up here pretty soon. I kind of had this specially made for me. I think that's pretty hot. I think I'm going to put that on the message or on the store here soon because I think it's a pretty cool thing. And yeah, got a lot going on for you. So make sure you stay locked into the message boards. Check out the website at irishbreakdown.com. And as always, thank you so much for joining us on the Irish Breakdown Podcast.